good afternoon or good night, everyone. I'm very pleased to convene this panel, whose title is Atauro People's Local Knowledge and Cultural Policy, Preliminary Findings of Interdisciplinary Research, whose main objective is to share research results of investigations done in Atauro during the last 5 years. Except for the papers from Catherine Keane and Ana Carolina Oliveira, all the papers presented in this panel are partial products of the project Cultural Policy, Local Heritage and Collaborative Approaches in Eastern Indonesia, that is backed by French institutions mainly, okay? So the panel is made up of 2 sections. In the first section, we will have 4 presentations. In the second section, we will have 3 presentations, okay? So I think all people presenting the papers are already online, except Catherine King, but I hope she will be online early. And I have to say that according to the program, I'm supposing to, okay, Catherine is here, sorry, I didn't see. So I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for attending our panel. So I'm supposed to start the presentation, and as you know, it's very early in Brazil now. It's about 6 a.m. and I thought I wouldn't be able to be very energetic by now, so I record my presentation to share with you, okay? So I will start my presentation now. Each of us are supposed to have around 50 minutes for each presentation, and then 20 minutes for discussion at the end of the panel, okay? Before to turn to my presentation, I also would like to express my gratefulness for all the organizers of this colloquium, which has been very interesting, very engaging, and it's so wonderful to be able to be in Brazil and at the same time to know that people in Dili are seeing us, are able to discuss our research findings with us, okay? So congratulations and thank you very much. I now turn to my presentation, which is made of a PowerPoint presentation and an audio file. They are not together. So I will share first the audio file, and then I will share my PowerPoint file. So let's start. This paper discussed assembly of This paper discussed Assembly of God's pastoral praxis in Atauro. Are you hearing me? Or just stop it?
We hear you, but we don't see.
Okay, just a moment.
Kelly, tem que abrir primeiro o seu PowerPoint e depois fazer, compartilhar a tela.
Ok.
This paper discusses Assembly of God's pastoral practices in Atauro on the basis of a 5-month fieldwork undertaken in Subemasso village, also called Beloi or Jerusalem, in 2019. It argues that Assembly of God's pastoral praxis has effected at least 3 main transformations in Subemasso people's cosmology. The first, the decline of asymmetry and inequality as cultural values framing the relationship among houses or among listens. Second, the dissociation between lulic and lisan or cultura. And 3, the Christianization of cultura and its use as a means for negotiating material reproduction exclusively. On one hand, all of these hypotheses derive from dialogues with works which have identified the main institutions organizing social dynamics in eastern Indonesia as a cultural region. So, I'm supposing Atauro people's social organization and cosmologies have also been framed by these institutions across time, and that part of them are being challenged by the Assembly of God's pastoral projects. On the other hand, I clarify that I understand cultura as an emic signifier used to refer to practices and institutions perceived as indigenous, such as those which characterize Eastern Indonesia as a cultural region, or even those that are simply different from others, deemed foreign. Among many Catholic and also non-Christian people, cultura also entails mystical, supernatural contexts, as it is connected to worship practices involving ancestors and other spiritual beings, and even what Western cosmology see as objects. In these cases, cultura is a synonym for lulic, a local category to the notion of sacred, amongst other potential meanings. To support my hypothesis, I organized this paper in 3 main sections. The first presents fragments of the history of Protestant missionary practices in Atauro and its expression in some phenomena occurring in the island today. The connection between the past history and the present is explored by pointing out the search for equality as a foundation for collective interaction. Hamos Lulic, or Cleaning the Sacred, is the subtitle of my second section, which discusses this dissociation of cultura from mystical practices and assumptions. To analyze such an issue, I mobilized diverse phenomena, toponymy strategies of the church, funerals, and the Day of the Dead routines in Subemasso. Based on them, I argue that the Assembly of God's pastoral projects yields the Christianization of culture institutional framework. I finished the presentation arguing that in Subemasso, listen was turned into a means strictly connected to material reproduction. I now turn to my second section. At least 3 different missionary endeavors seem to have taken part in the plot of Atauro people's adherence to Protestantism across the 20th century. An American missionary called Martin was active in the island by 1930s. There is no consensus about the denomination to which Martin was connected to. Some suggest he was at the service of the Baptist Church, others that he was a Lutheran missionary. They do not know anything else about him apart from the fact that he was obliged to leave the island after a short time there. After World War II, Juliana and Franz Brás supposedly went to Atauro from Arlo. Frederick Durand reports that by the beginning of the 1960s, Juliana and Franz led a community of 1,350 people, almost 40% of the Atauro population by the time. By sharing with me his knowledge about this community, one of the leading pastors of Assembly of God in Atauro said the place where Juliana and Franz Bas lived and carried out their missionary work was called Saramata, an Indonesian language word that means equals. After being obliged to move closer to Vila Maumeta by the Portuguese administration, they called Juliana and her husband, they called the new place where they lived Tetap Rata, which means to make things flat. My interlocutor's recollection about Juliana and Fran's actions highlights that the core of their work was to promote equality among people. No one, they would have thought that there is no one better or higher than another, no one bigger than another. They should not be anyone superior or inferior before one another, and even before God. Everyone would be equal and deserving of the same respect and treatment. I came across this search for equality on several occasions throughout my research in Atauro. I consider such anxiety to be an important challenge to the very institution of asymmetry and precedence between houses that is characteristic of Eastern Indonesia. One of the most prominent examples of such anxiety presented itself to me in the local law for marriage negotiation of the Makadad Suku, proposed in January 2014. The document set some rules regarding filiation, residency, and material limits for negotiating rights in persons by means of marriage exchanges. Among the various articles that compose what is called Lei Tradicional Balaqueado, one particular article stands out. After listing all the houses or licenses existing in Makadad, the traditional law proposed in the article number 10, inverted commas, about the classification and categorization of license in Makadad Suku. The classification and category of the 17 licenses existing in Makadad Suku is the same. There is no category or classification of license superior or inferior before one another. End of comments. Different questions may be posed about the meaning of the content of this article. On this, I would like to share some considerations. Firstly, we know that laws are technologies of government and control. Secondly, Makadad is a suku where approximately 50% of people are Protestant and 50% are Catholic. Catholic Christianity has been much more tolerant to local values as inequality and asymmetry than Protestantism. Thirdly, Cultura is an institutional framework whose modus operandi is marked by strong contestation, among other things because of its oral character. Consider all of this, the codification of the search for equality into law might mean that such is not really observed yet, but it is a moral ideal to search for. Another index of the way Protestant Christianity is changing the way people see inequality and asymmetry are some suggestions it presents about the making of gifts in marriage exchanges. According to Francisco, one of the elders from o Subemaço, the Assembly of God suggests that marriage exchange should not be managed as to exploit people, making them poor. He said that cultura should not make people poor, and that because everyone is codependent, people know that if they exploit someone today, they will be exploited by other ones tomorrow. As it is known, one of the main expressions of asymmetry between wife givers and wife takers consists of the quality and quantity of money and goods exchanged in marriage exchanges and other life cycle rituals. Wife or fertility takers are superior in these relationships, and as such they are entitled to receive much more goods and money than to give them. In fact, what is deemed as an excessive quantity and quality of goods employed in marriage exchanges in the main island of Timor-Leste is a phenomenon mobilized by Protestant Atauro residents to value their lifestyle and religion adherence. Broadly speaking, Protestant people in Subemaço are very proud of their asceticism and think about themselves and their lives as much better than those existing in Dili, for instance. I turn now for the second part of my paper, whose title is Ramos Lulic, Cleaning the Lulic, and or Towards the Christianization of Cultura. At the very beginning of my research work in Atauro, I was warned by local leaders that in villages like Belói, Acrema, and Uaruana, the Lulic were all cleaning. They say Lulic Ramosona. According to them, all people in the villages had converted to Assembly of God Christianity, and because of that, they no longer believed in or had Lulic anymore. They were saying that they do not worship trees, stones, places, and that they also do not sacrifice to ancestors or to other supernatural beings. According to them, all that existed in the world were Maromac creation, from whom all the power over the world emanates to. Such an encapsulating process by which local institutions are perceived as products of Christianity also makes itself visible in the Assembly of God toponyming strategy for the island. For some decades now, the Church has replaced or has proposed to replace local place names with names derived from biblical narratives. We have in the island today a double naming system for various places. For the sake of brevity, I share here only the double naming system for the village. So, an alternative name for Uaruana is Jericó, for Biquele is Belém, for Subemaço or Belói is Jerusalém, for Acrema is Sinai, for Maquile is Damascus. As I said elsewhere, Durkheim taught us that name places are parts of a cognitive system that guides people and allows them to recognize who they are in relation to others. James Fox, in his turn, pointed out that among Eastern Indonesian people there is a potential reversibility between genealogy and topogeny. So, to enunciate places in ritual contexts has the following functions. First, to define origins and lines of precedence among related social groups, and two, to provide the chronological succession of events so as to situate social actors in space and time. Additionally, we may remember the fact that some named places might be considered lulic, so reminding people of a past consubstantiation between a place, a people, and other environment elements. If all of these were somehow at stake in places local names in Atauro, replacing the local toponymy by new and Christian ones contributes to silence various local knowledges as well as the memory of facts which could hardly be included in Christians' narratives coherently. To Christianize the name of the places also contributes to erase from them the supernatural powers to whom people endow, or in the past endowed, agency in the very process of placemaking. I see all of this phenomenon as playing a role in the purification plot enacted by Assembly of God. Not by chance, the expression cleaning the lulic seems to express a process of sanitization and purification, in Bruno Latour's sense, aimed at establishing the Christian God as the unique and exclusive supernatural source of agency. In other words, we are facing a claim about the monopolization of agency carved out in opposition to animist and other ritual mystical practices which, on the other hand, attribute agency towards objects, ancestors, among others. The material effects of these assumptions manifest themselves in the Day of the Dead. In strong contrast to what comes about in most of Timor-Leste, the Day of the Dead in Subemaço is experienced as an ordinary day, without any kind of rituals. People claim that on that particular day, they only miss their deceased relatives or friends more than in other days. But there is no public function at the church or any kind of public rituals in the cemetery to pay respect to deceased. When I was in Subemaço, I was expecting at least that people would clean the graves that day. But in fact, they did not do that. They didn't do that. Most people in Subemaço just follow their ordinary working routines during that day. 1 year ago, and even when drafting this very paper as a proposal, I suggest that a sort of secularization of cultura is going on in Subemaço. I do not argue this anymore. It seems to me that we actually are before an attempt of encapsulating local institutions into a Christian meta-narrative. In this plot, the Christian God acts as the origin of everything, including the ancestors and the listen. The Christian God is the unique supernatural being endowed with agents to act over the living. But the denial of Lulic does not imply a rupture with other institutions that are typical of the region. On the contrary, the denial of a previous communion with ancestors and other supernatural beings did not imply people's disengagement with the listen, with the house. In fact, what seems to occur is rather a dissociation between the native categories of Lulic and listen or cultura, as to allow os Subemaço people to resort to cultura and to listen, to organize their collective and material life while adhering to Protestant Christianity at once and same time. In Subemaço, to finish, the Listen have maintained its roles as a key institution framing the following phenomenon, at least: negotiations in rights in people, land rights, and conflict resolution, even though it is not considered Lulic anymore. Thank you very much.
So that's it, people. I hope you could follow it okay. So now we pass to Dominique and Gabrielle presentation. I will share their presentation as I made with my presentation as well. So I ask you just a moment as to open their presentation here and to close mine as well.
Gabrielle and I will focus on the region of Makili in the southeast of Atauro.
Are you did you see or not? No? Okay, just a moment.
Gabrielle and I will focus on the region of Makili in the southeast of Atauro. We will present the way crises are handled by local populations and how they reveal some local characteristics. We will use a diachronic and territorial approach to understand the risks that this society is confronted with and the resources that it can count upon to deal with contemporary crises. We have collected the presented data during several fieldworks to Makili between 2018 and 2019 in the context of the Popeye Call project. As seen on the map, the island of Atauro is divided into 3 dialectal areas. Ratlungu is spoken in the southwest, which corresponds to the current Suco of Makadade. Gesuk is spoken in the Suko of Makili and in Villa, and the rest of the island, corresponding to the Suko of Bikeli and Beloy, speaks Rasua. These three dialectal areas correspond more or less to three political and cultural entities. We will call them polities. Makili is organized around 12 customary houses, Umalilait. Makadade has 7 houses spread from the south coast to the highlands. The rest of the island is divided between a third political ensemble, Mandroni, composed of 7 houses originally located in the north-central part of the island, and also each hamlet on the coast presents a combination of houses of various origins, but they do not seem to form a structured political grouping between them. The origin of these three polities is summed up in a narrative well known in Atauro. At the beginning of times, there was only a small island, the summit of Manukoko. There, 3 brothers, placed back to back, shot an arrow in an opposite direction. Where their arrow fell, the sea dried up and Atauro emerged. Then the brothers set out to search for their arrow and discovered being and things that gave birth to the present houses. Each polity is attached to one of the brothers. Makili is composed of 12 clans, divided into 56 currently identified customary houses, that is, the 12 mother houses that you can see on the slide and their ramifications. Some houses are difficult to identify, as several may be grouped together, and some are beginning to disappear. Here you can see on the map the distribution of the 12 mother houses in the territory. In Makili, the system of alliance and the division of territory between the clans reveal the principle of crisis prevention and resolution. Past and present crises are linked to the scarcity of environmental resources, which generates territorial conflicts within or outside the clans. In reverse, territorial conflicts limit access to resources. When you listen to the local folk tales or narratives of clan origins, you understand, behind the episodes of the myth or the steps of the migrations, the difficulties of local groups in dealing with environmental crises such as droughts and famines. The scarcity of resources also provoked conflicts about land, which could have a geopolitical dimension and could cause wars. We'll try to make an overview of past crises that we can discern in history, using as sources the historical knowledge of the informants and also some narratives linked to places, which will be cross-checked with some historical sources about the region for the chronology, even if this work needs to be enhanced. Although there is in other parts of the island the traces of an epidemic that resembles smallpox, we couldn't find so far the traces of such an epidemic in Makili. What is certain is that the first period suggests enemies in large boats with sails from nearby islands or from further islands linked to the slave trade that came to Makili. Some of these enemies would kill or abduct the inhabitants, but some would also engage in trades. In this first period, the populations were settled in places far from the dangerous coast with a system of watchmen. It's also possible that trade in which locals gave food in exchange for metal and various objects such as gun transformed the geopolitics of the island. There were possibly at some point conflicts between local clans, but what really is asserted is that when the current polities of Makili, Makadade and Mandroni took shape, there started a lasting rivalry between them linked to questions of boundaries, probably caused by unequal access to resources. In another phase, actors from outside the island intervened in Atauro. Atauro was since the 18th century reputedly included in the kingdom of Hera near Dili, which in the second part of the 19th century collected taxes in the island for the Portuguese. There was a war due to the refusal of Macadade to pay such taxes, in which we can witness Mandroni and Makili fighting on the Portuguese side the warriors of Macadade. During all those conflicts, there were strongholds that were built for refuge, and there were also times of food shortage. During colonial times, there were also the fact that the tax imposed by Portugal and the forced labor of the 20th century caused part of the island's population, especially men of working age, to leave the island, to flee to neighboring islands, but they subsequently returned. It means that mobility has always been a solution to a crisis. We will see that in the present time as well. In response to these past crises, there were in the local society mechanisms of alliances to maintain the cohesion of the groups, and I'll pass this over to Gabriel.
The first type of alliance is with non-humans. The legend of the beginning states that after all the land had been drained by the arrows, some non-humans, like animals and elements of the environment, became women and men who were the founders of some clans, or they were married by other humans who founded clans. In the narratives, the non-humans, like shell, snake, bird, turtle, shark, field mouse, whale, pig, mango, cloud, and star, and the matrices, like caves, giant clams, burrows, sky, the underwater realm, refer mainly to relations between the upstream mountainous and the downstream maritime worlds, but also to the underground or underwater universe and the celestial world. They symbolize a complementarity between the resources and techniques from the different realms, allowing the groups to cope with some conflicts, but also to survive food shortages and droughts. These epical ancestors refer to resources that are echoed in the names of the clans and houses, often the same as the toponyms of their locations. Another mode of solidarity between houses lies in the matrimonial system, very central in the social organization. At the heart of the alliance is the bridewells called belis, which price consists in about 60 items such as velian spades or salolon, clothes, nohi, and machetes, suri. The belis is present in a complex ensemble of exchange with a multitude of sequences, and its payment may extend over several decades or even generations, with the grooms or bride's children or grandchildren taking over if it has not been fully paid during their lifetime. We are going to examine now the present-day situation, the crisis, and the way people deal with them. While the clan has an inalienable ownership right over its territory, its branch houses, or even those of another clan, also take over the territory and tend to become autonomous over time, blurring the original territorial map. There is also the fact that multiple borrowers cultivate the land of another clan on a long-term basis. As you can see on the map, the link between the initial mother houses and their offshoots is not easy to read. The belief system might be partly responsible for this. When the bridewells is not fully paid when the parents die, the children still belong to their matrilineage. Also, they are on their patronage land and houses. Norms of use overlap or conflict with the clan's rights of ownership. But this blurring is also an element of social cohesion. It entails a lot of discussion in local customary courts, which have demonstrated their ability to settle land disputes, and the same goes with the different phases of a matrimony. All these events are important moments of sociability, during which knowledge about history and territory is expressed and passed on. The main mechanisms of social cohesion, such as the Belize-based system, are still active in Makili, while it is disappearing from the rest of the island. Its disappearance would pose a potential threat to the capitalization of bridewells and thus to the social cohesion within clans and families over the generations. Other threats are the displacement of the original habitat towards the coast, which entailed a loss of knowledge linked to the initial settlements and sacred houses. This is questioning the survival of a land and social system based on oral knowledge. Second, the development of Pentecostalism in the island from 1978 onwards also poses a threat to local cultures, even though Catholicism remains firmly established in Makili. Finally, especially since the independence, young people have shown little interest in the culture of the elders, and schooling, as well as the prospect of studying in Delhi, inexorably distances them from their elders' knowledge. While the notion of danger and insecurity is always present in Makili's narratives, today there seems to be some tangible security or even comfort coming along with electricity, basic necessities, goods from grocery stores, support from the church, solar panels, telephone and 3G networks. But while food shortages are partly solved, this new context creates new needs that the local production system can't fully satisfy. There are also new uncertainties due to climate change. The dry season is longer and more irregular, and springs produce less water. In reaction, mobility plays a key role as the regularity of transport to Delhi allows for occasional or seasonal work migration to the capital. The question is, do these mobilities provide lasting solutions to crises? As a last remark, there seems to be a discrepancy between the Makilians' visions of these transformations and ours. While we can observe profound transformations, Makili's inhabitants do acknowledge important changes such as climate change, the arrival of Christian religion, Indonesian occupation, national integration and government development policies, but they focus on the forms of continuities within their social structure. It is due to the fact that Makilians are confident in their system of resilience to crises, embedded in forms of social coherence and cohesion.
Thank you very much, Gabriel and Dominique. I suppose now we have more people in Delhi at the Portuguese embassy. So I would like to share with you that the last presentation was Dominique's and Gabriel's presentation, whose title was Clan Narratives and Territory in Makili, Atauro. I was expecting more people arrive at the Portuguese embassy to share with you in a more detailed way the main objectives of our panel. So this panel aims to share results of some researches carried out in Atauro during the last decade in a multidisciplinary approach. Three particular issues are to be discussed or is being discussed here. The first is the dynamics of production and reproduction of local knowledge and their impact on people cosmology and everyday life. The second is cultural policies led by governance agents as the state, local leaders, non-governmental organizations, church, among others. And the third objective is to discuss the impact of local knowledge on the making of biodiversity and other cultural heritage. I have also to add that, as you just heard, Dominique and Gabriel's paper, we also try to bring it to the fore some discussion about how people deal with difficult times, as all of us in a worldwide scale are facing the pandemic and the COVID pandemic. So it happened to us that it would be useful to discuss how local knowledge in Atauro to deal with crisis. So thank you very much. We turn now to our discussion, and now it's time to Dana Rapaport paper whose title is Musical Practices and Endangered Heritage on the Island of Atauro. Dana, if you don't mind, I would ask you to share your PowerPoint, because I have 3 dogs at home and we are very lucky now because they didn't bark, but they can do that. So I prefer to turn off my microphone.
Okay. All right. So nice to meet you. So I'm going to my presentation. Where is it? Merde. Évidemment. Alors, I'm sorry. Can you see it? Can you see something or not?
Yes.
Okay, so I put the présentation activée de plein écran.
Dana, I'm not. Your sound is not going on. The sound.
Oh, so you don't hear me?
No.
Merde. Personne m'entend? Dominique, you don't hear?
On entend toi, mais on n'entend pas les PowerPoint, et on voit toi et on voit pas les PowerPoint.
Ah merde.
C'est-à-dire on voit en tout petit les PowerPoint. Je ne sais pas si c'est que moi.
Attends. Alors attends, je vais
Non, il faut que tu le mettes en plein écran, ton PowerPoint.
Ouais, c'est pas un PowerPoint, c'est un film.
Ah.
Alors attends, je vais passer le film. Voyons voir si ça passe. Est-ce que là, vous m'entendez ou pas?
On t'entend.
Yes.
On t'entend.
Là, vous entendez quand je dis nice to meet you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I try again.
Dana, je crois qu'on entend le son, mais très très loin.
Très loin? Merde.
I think that this is because you are with your headset. You have to turn off your headset.
Okay. So I put out the headset.
About Atauro.
Yes, now it's fine.
Nice to meet you. I'm French. My name is Dana Rapoport, and I'm ethnomusicologist.
Is it okay, Kelly?
Today I will speak about Atauro's musical endangered heritage. At a first glance, Atauro's traditional music seems to have resisted to Portuguese colonization, to evangelization, and to Indonesian invasion. Yet the situation is more worrying than it seems. A large number of musical forms have already disappeared from the island. What remains today of Atauro's musical tradition? That's the topic of my paper. So I will present you an overview of the music in this island. This overview is based on a musical survey made in November 2019 with the help of Dominique Guillot. I recorded the music in the 2 most populated districts of the island, Macarade in the mountains and Makili close to the sea. Each of these districts is populated by around 2,500 persons each. Both districts have a different dialect. They have their own dialect, which is related, Raklungu and Resuk. Very little documentation on Atauro's music and poetry is available, except the book of Father Duarte, a book very important called Timor, Ritos y Mitos Atauros, published in 1984. I will address 4 points in this paper. Music and rituals in Makili and Macaradi before 1974. Second point will be the Atauro's music in the present, then musical forms and styles, and 4th point will be the endangered music of Atauro. Before Atauro people were converted to Christianity, singing was somehow a way of connecting humans to non-human beings. They had various songs. The songs at the water spring were highly valued. Every year, people would go to clean the spring and to summon the ancestors for water. Another kind of songs were the songs for ancestors. It was linked to the first group, and it was performed in front of the wooden figures that you see on the photo, the Itara, and there were two figures, Bakumau and Lepumoru, male and female, linked to fertility. These two first ensemble of songs have been abandoned and have been stopped in 1974 because the rituals have been forbidden. Another kind of songs who was really sung and performed was the song when they renovate ceremonial houses or granary. People would dance, around dance, Roinelu, during 1 week. Today, the ritual is still performed, but they don't sing anymore, and they use sound system instead. The funerary singing was much performed at the death of someone with the Sita song, and also 1 year after the death. But this mateheleri in Makadade, for example, is not performed anymore. Last music was the war music, because before the many clans they would go to head hunting, and they would perform head hunting to the sound of gong and drumming, singing and dancing in order to diminish fears. How about now music in the present? What do we have? What do I have? What did I record? First group is the intimate vocal music with soft instruments. In that ensemble, we found the musical bow with singing and the solo song for oneself. Another big group of music is the loud collective music with dancing in motion. So usually we found responsorial chorus singing. So in that ensemble, we have a lot of songs, the canoe songs, the canoe choruses, the round dance, the funeral lamentation, and the collecting songs at the sea. And the third group is represented by the imported music, so usually from Christianity. So we have the church choral music, the organ, violins, guitars, and popular music. In Makadade, two soft instruments are still much used for intimate music, for soft music. The Jew's harp, aklamu, and the musical bow. Let's now listen to the musical bow, so famous in Makadade, the musical bow Rama. Intimate music is also performed by singing only, whether soloist or whether collective. It can move to tears, and it often moves to tears, not only those who listen, but also those who sing it, men or women. We're now going to listen to a mixed vocal song, a collective singing from Makadade. Another group of song is the loud collective music in motion for big ceremonies, big rituals, and joyful events. These songs are performed with dancers and they are set in motion. An important set of songs is related to the pulling of the guard canoe from the mountain to the sea. There are around 20 songs because it lasts a very long time. It lasts one day, in Makili 1 day, but in Makarade it lasted for between 3 to 4 days. And the songs are sung in a responsorial chorus. So let's listen to one of these songs. I want to emphasize the musical forms and styles. Makili and Makarade share a related musical idiom. They have common musical forms, but their style is different. Their idiom is made of a great technicity in vocal performance. It is characterized by a mastery of loudness, a wide ambitus of pitches of scale with the augmented fourth, the triton, a mastering of time, but there are differences in vocal technique. In Makili, we have more yodel and vibrato. Let's listen to Kulikuru, a singer, a fisherman from Makili. Just a small example to show how he mastered the yodel and the vibrato and all these parameters. How about instrumental music? It is more performed in Makarade than Makili. However, in Makili, we still find one instrument, the tihak, a goatskin hourglass drum, in 2 sizes. In comparison, the drum of Makarade, called tama, is different. It has 2 skin head. And this tama accompanies the gong ensemble. Our last example is the gong drum music from Makarade. It was used during wars to diminish fear, but it is still performed without war. Let's come to the 4th part, endangered music heritage. I have listed here a large number of endangered musical forms, as ritual chanting at the water spring, the souk sose, the tei sour, roaring song, because now they don't use it anymore because of the motorboat, boat pulling songs, raho, tei, klorunro, funeral chanting as sita, matehileri, the myth of origin of the songs, and the gong and drum music. All of these forms are really endangered and they can disappear in the next years. Several factors explain the disappearing of these musical forms. The first is the Portuguese colonization that has introduced tonal music through church singing. And there are a lot of other reasons that we could list, but this is not the place for that. after this first survey, I think that in the future, for the future, we need to continue to safeguard Atauro's musical heritage online through sound and video documentation. We need also to continue collaborative research with the musicians of Atauro in the whole island. We have to document, to record, to film, to analyze and transcribe Atauro's music. We need to list the repertoires and describe the musical techniques, and we need to think about a plan of transmission for the future. All this will need a lot of time, and so for the next year, we hope that we can come back to Atauro very soon. I thank all my colleagues in the project, and I really send a very good, incredible thanks to Atauro's people who were so nice with us during our field work, and we really miss them. Bye. Merde, voilà. Merde. Ok. Merde. Ah merde. Voilà, sorry. Can you hear me? Kelly?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Have you listened? Was it okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this was Dana Rappaport presentation entitled Music Practices and Endangered Heritage on the Islands of Atauro. Thank you, Dana. Now we pass to Ana Carolina Oliveira presentation. Ana Carolina will give us the paper entitled The Reproduction of Knowledge in Times of Money, a study on the reproduction of Atauro's status for the tourism market. Ana, are you here? Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so first I prepared a PowerPoint presentation with some photos to show you. I guess I can share my screen. So in first place, I would like to thank Kelly and also the organization of the colloquium. It's been really interesting to have this first experience abroad in social distance. So I hope we have a lot of reflections. Let me share my, okay. Are you seeing? Yes, I guess so. So, secondly, if Marcos Pacheco, Ingracia, and Tomasa were here, I would also thank them for having received me and making my research possible. Secondly, I apologize in advance for my English and ask you to let me know if I speak too fast, and I usually do this when I get nervous. I've prepared my PowerPoint with photos and will read parts of the paper in English I've sent to the group. So this presentation is an attempt to explore a little bit what is involved in the production of the Atauro's status nowadays and the social transformations that has been occurred due to the excess of money from the sale of these artifacts as commodities. So walking through tourist places of Dili, it is not hard to find young and old men selling sculptures and other wooden handcrafts from Makili. These artifacts are being promoted by the government agents and even their own community as culture from Atauro, and has been really attractive to tourists, especially foreigners. The revenue originating from their sales has been an important element to the livelihood and social reproduction of the families that hold the expertise on the production of these statues. In present days, while the art of sculpting is becoming increasingly shaped by the interest of the tourist market, its roots are related to the local spiritual beliefs and to the logic of the gift as proposed by Marcel Mauss. According to Bartman, statues have an important role in connecting and maintaining relationships to ancestors, being essential to the protection of group and their holy spaces and being part of different community rituals. In this communication, I seek to present the dynamic of the production of Maquil's sculpture families, as well as the dynamic of consumption, which is enabled by the sale of these artifacts. This matter can be well understood through the experience I have with Marcos Pacheco and his wife here, and his children. So I've noticed that this traditional knowledge transformed into commodity has been one of the important means to provide young people with access to higher education in Dili and to contribute on the local rituals. Thus, there is a process of change of the knowledge networks in current day of East Timor. What I've noticed as well is that to be in a university or to have a relative in such a space has been increasingly a factor that brings prestige and that has brought new dynamics and negotiations to the local social organization. And while I was in Timor in the second half of 2017, I've attended classes at the UNTL, and I've met the student Ingracia, who is in the photo, and she is original from Maquile. After posting a picture of us together on her Facebook page, she found out that me and Marcos Pacheco, her brother-in-law, had already met in Beloy, in Atauro in August, and invited me to meet her community on the Matabian holidays. So after October until the end of my field, I've started to following the daily home life of my Pacheco family. And besides following the production of Marcos Pacheco, I've made some interviews with other artisans in Maquile, and I've also had been in contact with some youth from the Pacheco and his wife's Listen. As I am a woman and I'm young, so I was always with them as well. So first, just sharing some points about Maquile. I probably almost all of you know, but anyway. And in general, there is the three activities more: the agriculture, fishing, and breeding some animals are the activities that they have, but they are really for domestic units and not for the market. So in terms of monetary income, as in other regions of East Timor, the possibilities in Maquile are quite low. As Atauro has been promoted as an important tourist place, the sales of the statues as souvenirs for this type of market has an important impact on starting to open other possibilities of access and investments. Another point is about the number of youths attending university, youths from Maquile specifically. They are very low number, and this is an important point because since the execution of domestic work is shared mainly between people who live in the household, the exit of young people, both men and women, to the capital if they aim to further their studies has a significant impact on the everyday responsibilities. Although this exit is a potential destabilizer for the domestic division of labor, it is stimulated by the people that have resources. The investments made in education holds the expectation that the social mobility of the young investment recipient may generate further revenues to the lease and to their staff and to next generation. Another important point that I will not focus a lot here is about the social organization and the social institution in Timor-Leste, the LISA, and its logic of the gift. I'm not going to concentrate, but as has already been shown in other panels as well, the alliance between LISAs through marriage involves many exchanges for which money is of paramount importance and investment in the education of young people from the LISA too, as I realized that this fact brings a lot of prestige. And so I start my presentation talking about a little bit about the specific process of production and some changes, because in the history of East Timor, as shown by Bartman, The adoption of Christianism changed the engagement of the population to this production. It was only after the tourist interest of acquiring these statues as representative objects of Atauro's culture that emerged the interest in these productions more and more between demands from the community. Both Marcos and his brother, Leonardo, that I've also met, and also products statues, remarked that they only became interested in learning these production techniques from their uncle, Mr. Antonio, at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, when East Timor started attracting an increasing number of foreigners. The demand for souvenirs and the emergence of these statues in the international art market were important elements in the revival of this knowledge, as Barkman showed us. Today, the required knowledge to sculpt is already diversified and different models and techniques were added to it. The main change regards the coloring process of statues. Currently, many sculptors use pen to color the statues, but formerly, the smoking process, in which the already molded statues are smoked on the surface where they also cook, was the sole responsibility for toning these statues. The smoke stemming from the cooking process colors the statues and leaves them with a less artificial tone, as was said to me by Marcos. In Marcos' production, he does not use paint and always stresses that the quality of this model is better and attracts greater tourist interest. To produce them, Marcos spent most of his time sculpting the models so that he could leave them resting in the kitchen for 2 or 3 days. After that, the pieces went through a completion process and then come back to another smoking process after this moment that is shown in the picture. Thursday and Saturdays were reserved for Marcos' jobs at Barry's place. On the other days, he focused mainly on the production of the statues, except for moments such as Sunday mornings, which were reserved for church, or in case of rituals or agricultural activities. Marcos was always producing with his katana, his cigarette, and his coffee by his side. In fact, he informed me of the fact that his participation in agricultural activities was even reduced due to his work with the statues, and sometimes he paid an amount of money so that someone else would perform this job for him and Tomasia. In everyday observations and talks with Tomasia, I realized the great importance her presence and of some of her brother and sisters had in caring for their children and their household while Marcos worked. In an interview, she told me that she would not be able to work outside her home, despite wanting to do so, because the house was under her responsibility due to Marcos' focus on the statues, and there was an intense demand. So this is an important point in my research because I started my research in Timor-Leste with some women empowerment projects, and then I've changed it a little bit as some anthropologists understand this type of situation. And she expressed it to me how important was the domestic space and how she was in power of that organization while Marcos was focused on the statue. So this brings kind of a change in the domestic unit. Because of that, 4 of Tomasia's siblings had already lived in Marcos and Tomasia's domestic unit for a while, helping her taking care of the house. Those 4 siblings also have received financial help from Marcos to handle their studies in Dili, something that Marcos always stressed with pride. He mentioned with me the specific case of his brother-in-law, João, which he helped. João did not finish his study due to the fact that he had to move to Los Palos to live with the family of his future wife, who had then become pregnant. It was upon hearing about this case that I realized how seriously Marcos took this kind of investment. Marcos told me that he was sad about the fact that João had not finished his studies and that it was important to put his studies at that moment when you are young before marriage. I asked him if he expected to get returns on his investments. He firmly affirmed that he did not, but that was bad because studies are currently an important way of improving one's lives, and that he actually hoped these young people now could later help his children when they reach school age. So Marcus informed me at that moment that the monetary resource that came from the sales in the tourist market were not informed by an individualistic and capitalist logic of capital accumulation. The notion of investment he was presenting to me was more bounded by the logic of the gift, and both because the return on investment he puts on the calculation on time did not concern a short term, but a long term, and because the recipients of a great amount of his resource were from his wife, Listen. Other craftsmen reported that they paid for the education of some of their siblings-in-law. If on the one hand, as it observed in the dynamic of ritual exchange between houses, the man's listen is usually in debt with the woman's listen, which gives the latter more bargaining power throughout the relationship. Marcus' case and the financial access he has had through selling the status may suggest to us that his engagement to the market is allowing some sort of transformation in the power relations in that case. For example, at the end of the year during Christmas shopping season, Marcus prevented Ingracia from purchasing a specific piece of cloth because he did not think it was appropriated to a woman. And also in different times, during different times of my field, he was always in position to allow or not her to do some travel or some other points during her life in Dili. And also another interesting fact is upon returning home, Ingracia was always torn apart between her duties in her parents' house and her duties in Marco's house. That also happened with her brother in the same situation as her, Lúcio. In Maquile, he was frustrated because he wasn't able to focus on his studies, as he needed to help his father on fishing and other activities. At another time, Natalia, Tomás's young sister, informed me that she would also like to attend the university, especially to go to Dili, since there were few opportunities for her in Maquile. Some leaders expressed to me that the woman specifically only leaves Maquile for marriage or studies purpose. That can make us think about how higher education has been a great impact, especially for women and their expectations for the future. And so, I'm not sure how many times is left. Kelly, could you tell me, please?
Yes, you have more 3 minutes.
Okay, just to lastly, I just like to summarize those 2 important points that I've brought. One that was not so deep, but is the change in the status and the production of them with some high interest of foreigners. So that has been some kind of change in the model and in the painting process. But in the other side, it's also interesting to see how this is having impact for the youth in this community, and how they express this as an important point for the future, and how they want to be in the school, to have other kind of opportunities. So these are preliminary finds. I mean, I didn't go through it a lot in my research, but that keeps me thinking about it more and more, as we know this type of situation and having access to money and education has inequality all over the world. So I guess it's really important to have a look on that nowadays, and how this changes the knowledge that this youth brings back to the community. When I was there, the youth from Dili was trying to make a tarabandu in the place where they have like water and all those things. And this always came from the youth from Dili, a lot of different activities. So, well, that's it. It's kind of interesting to see what's going on between these generations, and that's it.
Thank you, Ana Carolina. Can you, yes, that's it. Thank you very much. So people, we have finished the 4 presentations we have planned for this first section of our panel. So we have a time for debate now. We are a little bit late, but I don't think this is a problem because we have less one paper for the next section. So I will open the time for debate now. So please, people in Dili, would you like to put some questions to us?
Yes, Kelly, I have a question.
Yes, please.
It's for you. It's do you have the real statistic on Christianity now on Atauro, in these 8,000 people living in Atauro? How many are Assembly of God? How many are Catholic? Do you have some statistic about that?
Now I don't have, but I don't think this is difficult to find. I would say that more or less at least 70% of people would be Protestant. Okay.
70, you mean?
No, 70.
70, okay. That's the majority.
The majority, yes. Mm-hmm. But I have to confirm, okay, with you. So I don't have the statistical now, but yeah, but most of people are Protestant. This is for sure. Okay. You will find Catholic people only in Macadad and Maquile. We have just a few households, Catholic households in Beloy. I would say 5-7 households that are of people who migrated to Beloy, to Subemaço, to work as teachers or other things like that. But yeah, most of people are Protestant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And about it, just because you put your question, Dana, for example, your research and Ana Carolina research are giving us a perspective about Atauro, which is very different because your research are based in Maquile or in Macadad, where you have much more Catholic people than in other parts of the island. So, in your opinion, to which extent the reproduction of this local knowledge in Maquile and Macadad is connected, is due to the Catholic adherence of people?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's very hard to say for me. It's hard to answer because I've been it was so short for me, you know, only 10 days in each village. So I'm not sure about that. I have seen that Protestant people in Macarade, for example, they would still sing. They would still be able to sing. So that's a good point, but I should say more and I can't answer. What I saw that there was a dynamic, a very good dynamic 15 years ago by Amo Siku, Father Siku, who created artistic grupos. I don't know, maybe you know that. So. Yeah. So in Macarade, for example, there are six grupos, so ensemble, and 4 of them are musical. So I see that the Catholic Church in Macarade was active in the reproduction of, in the memory of musical knowledge, for example. But in Maquile, I'm not sure. I saw that, the violin, the guitars, are everywhere now. In the evening,
the young people that just want to play guitar or violin, and so the traditional music is really actually dying, even if people still know a lot, but it's dying. And they say they were so happy that we come to make something. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anna?
So I agree with Dana, but I guess I would say first, I've been more close to Marcos' family, and it's a really division between Protestant and Catholic. And as I've realized in Makili, between other moments, they don't really get in touch with like groups, and they don't mask themselves. So I'm not sure how to answer that, but I guess that I wouldn't say the knowledge for the Protestant people died and they don't reproduce that. No, because as Dana said, Chico has a really important movement with the woman and with the whole community, bringing them together to produce and to make this. Also, Empresa Dia has an important impact on that. So the Protestant has, I guess, has keep doing this traditional knowledge that was once more closely to the ancestor, the beliefs, the spiritual beliefs. But I guess, as you Kelly pointed in your paper, it's not like they are the secularization, but they are transforming the meaning of this knowledge for them. So now this knowledge is important to bring some resource to make a better house, that it's also a income investment that they do a lot in there, and other type of investment. So I guess they are not more so closely to the protection of their daily life and to the connection of the ancestors. Once Vicente, one of the sculptors as well, told me that in the old times, in the Indonesian times, they sold the statues, the original ones that were in the list, to the Indonesian, because they proposed a lot of money. And then after that, they had a moment with the ancestor, and they said, no, you cannot sell the original, so you have to replicate them. And then after that, and then all the change in Timor-Leste, they started to make some reproduction. So now Marcos told me during this pandemic moment that he's trying to make some umalisan, as well as ancestors asked him to do it. So for Catholic, they are keeping in contact with this type of these ancestors. And I'm not sure if I can answer the question that was posted here in the chat. Can I?
Yes, please. It's for you.
So do people from other parts of TL have an interest? So yes, but I would say it's not that high, because they were always expressing to me how the Timorese people didn't want that much, because they don't value as an important artifact to be in a decoration, because it keeps more for decoration nowadays. It's not used, they use this to make the rituals, but in Makili, not in other places of East Timor. It's not all over like ties and other artifacts. So for East Timorese people, $10, $20, $25, $30, it's really expensive to spend on that. And also, but I don't have more inputs on that. So I guess nowadays, for example, in the pandemic moment, Marcos told me that they are not selling at all. And that has brought a lot of difficult situations over there regarding a lot of things. So all over. Dana also asked me, have you studied the original use of the statue in older time? So I didn't get to make some interviews, but I've read the book from Barkman, that one that I referenced, and from there that I got more of my information. And also during the the moments with Marcos and also some moments with rituals that I saw they use, like not these statues, but let me just have this. No, it's not here, it's in other place, but it's some masks. They also use it to some rituals on when people are sick or something like that. So they used this in 2017 while I was there. So my incomes and my information about this is mostly from the Barkman books.
Thank you, Anna. So we have a question from Catherine as well about the religious profile of people in Villa. So Catherine asked if people in Villa are Catholic or Protestant. Both of them, I would say, but I don't know exactly the numbers now. But you have more Catholic people in Villa than in Beloy or in Bikeli, for sure. But I cannot quantify that for now. For example, if we pay attention to the number of church buildings that we have in each village, that will give us a sign of the amount of people that adhere to each of the denominations. So we have Catholic buildings in Macadade, in Villa, and in Maquile. Is it right? But we don't have that big building, Catholic building in Beloy or in Bikeli, or in Acrema or Waruana, for instance. So the big buildings, the bigger buildings, Catholic buildings in the island, they are placed only in Villa, Maquile, and Macadade, okay? In the other, on the other villages, we have only Protestant buildings, according to what I was able to observe till now. In Beloy, we have just a small Catholic building that they call Capella, where we have some church functions on Sunday, but it's very small, okay? Yeah, I'd like just to add an observation about music and the status on the basis of some information I got in my research in Beloy. According to the pastors I have talking with, they see some cultural manifestations as disguised expression of the devil. So they are very how to say, so restrict about people engagement with this kind of phenomena, as they are seen as an attempt of the devil to approach people by alternative means, okay? So people from Dili, any other questions? Or people seeing us all from other places? No? Okay. So
Kelly, if there is more time, I have a question for someone.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So it is a question for Dominique and Gabrielle about the bellis, how we say the bellis in English, the bellis system.
Bridewell.
Bridewell ritual and Bridewell system. Dominique and Gabrielle, can you hear me?
Yes, Dominique is in a flight right now, so I will be.
Okay. So yeah, so it's hard to answer for you, because my question was about you say that you feel that there is an erosion of the bellis system in Maquile.
No, mainly in Macadade, and in Maquile it's more difficult to.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So do you think, how could we explain the difference between Makili and Makadade about this bride wealth system, which seems so important in Makili. I mean, every day we see people going for a bride wealth. So all the exchange, all the stability of the society seems to be unrooted in that. Whereas in Makadade, it seems that it's not important. So do you have some explanation?
Unfortunately not, because Dominique is the specialist of Makadade and I have never been there. So I have no cooperative point of view.
Okay, okay, sorry.
Tell, but,
yeah, if I can, I'd like to add a commentary on this issue, because I read the paper and I was very surprised to see that according to, in fact, I didn't understand really what was being suggested in the paper. If, in fact, Makili people would see that the bride wealth system was going down in all over Atauro, so is this people perspective, or are you suggesting that this is going on? So a process of erosion of marriage exchanges all over Atauro. So if this was the case, I would disagree. I don't think so. I think that, as I suggested in my paper, at least in Subemaço, people are very engaged with marriage exchange till now, even the Protestant people. But what happened is that people are like Christianizing the marriage exchanges, are disconnecting them, the institution, from any relation with ancestors. So marriage exchange is a matter of material reproduction. Is by means of marriage exchanges, people are, for example, negotiating their land rights, etc., etc. So do you have anything to say about that, Gabriel?
Concerning Makadade, it seems that the territorial conflicts are less intense than in Makili, because maybe the area is less densely populated, and maybe also it's wider. In Makili, it's very dense. So I think that the matrimonial system of exchange is a need there more than in Makadade. For Dominique, in Makadade, the belly system is eroding, and it's not very practiced. In Makili, it's still very practiced. On the other part of Atauro, I could not say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Also, concerning the first point that we discussed about the preeminence of Protestants, and in Makili, it's not that important, because the Catholics is the main population. And I think that the cohabitation between the local customs and, for example, the belly system and the Catholic Church and its practices and ideology is not a matter really of ideas, but of how the ideas are conveyed by particular persons. For example, the priest in Makili is very open in his words and in his actions to the local customs and the social organization. And we have also authority leaders, figures who are important into the belly system organization, who are open to collaboration with the church, for example, for the development of small infrastructures like pipe waters and also fishing infrastructures. So I think that it's not a matter of problems between ideologies, but how these ideologies can interact and cohabit through these different persons.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Lisa, a question. Kelly, can you please explain a little more about the land rights without listen, and how this is working with the marriage exchange system? So just a comment to Lisa's question here. You can read the question at the chat. So Lisa, what I suggested in my paper is that the listen keeps being very important. But what happened is that listen is not anymore considered lulic, okay? Listen is a local institution by means of very important to people negotiate their social reproduction, their material reproduction. So even among the Protestant people, they are very attentive to marriage exchanges and to land rights on the basis of their belonging to listen. But what happens is that listen is not considered anymore a gift from ancestors. It is inscribed now in a Catholic, sorry, not in a Protestant, in a Christian meta-narratives. The Christian, so the idea is that listen was done by Maroma, that is the Christian God for them. So, and that the ancestors don't have any role in defining how they live and what they do with the listen. Okay, so this is what is at stake, at least in Subemaço by now, I think.
Kelly, do we have time? I guess not.
No, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe for the next section. Okay. That we have just 3 papers in the next section. So I'm sorry, Carol, for that, but okay. I would suggest us to have a 15 minutes break only, and to be back here about 15 minutes to 8 o'clock in Brazil. So I don't know what will be your time now. You can just work out that. So we have a break now, and in 15 minutes we are back, okay? If you don't mind, okay? Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. We are back to resume the second section of the panel 6, entitled Atauro People's Local Knowledge and Cultural Policy, Preliminary Finds of Interdisciplinary Research. I'm just waiting all the participants to return to their computers.
Hi, Kelly. I had a quick question while we're waiting, maybe.
Yes.
Is Usubemaço, that's a name the same as Beloy, like the same place?
Yes, yes.
So Beloy, is that an Indonesian name or?
No, it's a local name, but Beloy is the name of the stupo, okay? But it is the name of the stupo and the name of the village, but only people outside Atauro will call Usubemaço Beloy, because Beloy is the name of the stupo. In fact, the village where Barry's place is, for example,
the ferry. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Ari, are you here? Ari?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, just to check. Okay. So people, welcome back. We will resume, as I said some minutes before, the panel 6. And this is the second section of the panel 6. So we will start the second section with the paper delivered by Ariadna Burgos, whose title is Local Knowledge, Artisanal Fisheries and Conservation Initiatives in Atauro Island. So thank you very much, Ari, and please go ahead.
Thank you. So I will share my screen. Let me just take out here. Okay. Is it okay now? Kelly?
It's okay. Yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to share with you my research and experience in Timor-Leste. So the title of my presentation is Local Knowledge, Artisanal Fisheries and Conservation Initiatives in Atauro Island. I am Ariadna Burgos. I am postdoctoral researcher at the Laboratory of Local Heritage, Environment and Globalization located in Paris, PALOC. Sorry, because I have a problem. Okay. So my research was conducted in the frame of the Popeye Call project that you have seen few presentations before. But just to make a reminder, what is heritage? So heritage is the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes which contribute to the character and local distinctiveness of an area. You can see here, for instance, Mr. Kurikuru that you heard in Dana's presentation from Macarade, and he's blowing a shell trumpet. The shell here is the physical artifact. This is the physical artifact. But the harmony and the technique that he's produced is the intangible attribute of heritage. So our project has two principal aims: to understand heritage as perceived and conceived by the local communities, and to enhance this type of local heritage in cultural policies. I will focus my presentation on molluscan heritage. So just to make a point here, what are mollusks? Mollusks are invertebrate species such as gastropods and bivalves, shells, but also octopus, squids, and chitons are mollusks. So this is the group of mollusks. It's a very big taxon in ecology, in biology. And mollusks play a key role as a source of food, income, and also identity and symbolism. So the objectives of this aspect of my research were to assess the diversity of practices, knowledge, and representations related to mollusks, to understand how social ecological changes affect the way people interact with this type of resource, as well as with the marine environment, and to provide lines of action to enhance the inclusion of molluscan fisheries, local knowledge, and know-how in cultural policies. So many people know where it's located, Atauro, just 25 kilometers north of Dili. But Atauro is a small volcanic island. Volcanic means that there's a very remarkable contrasted of topography that creates a high diversity of ecosystems and seashores. So we will find here in the north part of Atauro that it's quite flat, up to 200 meters, 300 meters. And here it's extremely high, or high. It's 1,000 meters of altitude in Mount Manukoko. This island is remarkable for its marine biodiversity. As a matter of fact, biodiversity surveys carried in the island have shown an outstanding diversity of coral and fish, and Atauro might have one of the highest marine diversity in the world. So these are the type of contrasted landscapes and seascapes that you see on the island: rocky shores, beaches, seagrasses, high cliffs, coral reefs, and even there are small patches of mangroves. This diversity of habitats create a diversity of spaces for mollusks to live, to reproduce, and to develop. In Atauro, I have assessed 67 species of shelled mollusks. This diversity only takes in account the diversity of species that are used by the local communities, either for food, ornamentation, or for jewelry making. There are 19 species of bivalves and 48 species of gastropods. So a total of 63 species are edible and are used for food, and 4 specimens are not consumed at all, but are used only for jewelry or as symbolic items. Some species are used for food and also, So we are talking here of a very important marine multi-use resource where the flesh of the shell of mollusks is used, but also the dead animal, the shell, is used. The shell of Charonia tritonis, for instance, is used for as a shell trumpet to gather a group of people to communicate an important urgent matter. According to the sound emitted, we will call a different clan. It is also used to tell the entire community to work or make activities decided on the shore. The harvest or gathering of shells in the seashore is called in Tetun meti. Meti is primarily a woman's activity. Children are also highly involved in meti. Shell fishing makes part of Atauro interconnected food production systems, along with other types of fishing, as well as with agriculture and animal farming. Shells are still highly abundant in the island, but are never consumed on a daily basis. This activity can be carried during the day or the night. Women avoid to look for shells in the middle of the day. And this activity is carried mostly during low tides. So this resource is used, it's used also when in periods of shortage, when there's not much to eat, or when the sea is too big, but not exclusively. But we are talking also here of a very, very important source of food and nutrition for Atauro's community. But looking at shells is not an easy task. This species meld perfectly with the environment, and women have to explore with extremely high attention the seashore. Mollusks are very specific to certain type of habitats. For instance, here you see Nerita undata, this type of shell, you will only find in this type of environment. Asaphis violancens, it will only be here, and so on. Each of these species is located in one specific environment of the coastal seashore. This is just a representation of one of the parts of Atauro Island, but you have to know that everywhere is changing. Everywhere in Atauro, it has a different configuration. Also here, the species habitat makes that the activity or the technique to look for the shell is different from one side to the other. So here we are in hand picking. Here we are using a tool to find a shell that is buried on the substrate. Here we are using also a shell, but to extract out of the coral reef. And in this part here, actually is men who are the main gatherers. So in this part where the tide comes up and down, it's mostly women and children, but in the part that it's subtidal part, it's men that gather these types of shells while fishing. And it's not that they go exclusively to get this shell, but if they are fishing and they see it, they take it. So beyond the importance of shells for nutrition, it also has symbolical values. As I said before, this type of shell is used as a trumpet to call the clan. But shells are also used for income. And we can see in the Veloy market, the shells being sold for food. This type of shell is mostly sold to local people from other parts of Atauro, while the shells that are used for jewelry or adornment or decoration are mostly sold to tourists that are from another parts of the island. But sorry, another part, not from the island, but domestic tourists or international tourists. What is remarkable is that shells are used from prehistoric times, and they can be seen along the coastlines as well as on the top of Atauro mountains. They can be seen isolated fragments of shells, or they can be mounds or shell deposits. The study conducted by one of my colleagues from our project, it's Jean-Christophe Galipeau, shows that records of shell in Atauro Island died up to 18,000 years old, but they can be other deposits. These shells accumulations, whether recent or old, show the temporal and spatial importance of this resource to the societies that have inhabited the island. They also show that many of these species were consumed in the past and are consumed today, which proves in a way the extent and sustainability of molluscan exploitation practices. During the last years, a series of marine protected areas have been seen the light in Atauro, as in other localities in Timor-Leste. These marine protected areas have adopted the name of Tarabandu, which is a traditional form of management. Indeed, it's highly related with Western conservation strategies. These no-take zones means that nobody can go fish in these localities. And most Tarabandu zones in the island actually cover the entire extent of the village, from one side to the another, and even beyond. I will highlight two aspects that caught my attention during my fieldwork. I'm gonna be critical with this. I know there are very positive things, but I just wanna call your attention on two things that call my attention. First, while international divers and tourists are allowed to enter Tarabandu zones in exchange for a fee of $2, the same principle of fees apply to locals, including children. $2 represent a significant amount of money to Atauro people. And this principle entails that children can no longer swim in front of their houses or their village, where they can be easily surveyed by their parents or relatives. This affects children's interactions with the sea and put them at risk, as they need to find distant localities to be in contact with the ocean. Secondly, in Tarabandu zones, all fishing practices are prohibited and liable of financial penalties. Women whose fisheries depend on marine invertebrates as mollusks, these species are located in this type of habitats. So women are obligated to walk long distance in order to look for shellfish. This, in addition to the many tasks that women have to accomplish for the functioning of the household, creates an impediment to search rapidly for animal protein and discourage women from carrying out this activity. It is worth highlighting here that in Timor-Leste, 50% of the children under 5 years old are subjected to malnutrition, and chronic food insecurity affects 64% of the population during the dry season. Shellfish and other marine invertebrates represent a rich source of animal protein and provide micronutrients that can foster child development and food security and provide nutrition in Timor-Leste. Today, Atauro Island is affected by important social and ecological challenges, such as change in food and education system, coastlines with the development of new roads along the coast, marine resources changes in the distribution and abundance of fish, land management, the transmission of knowledge, access to resources, as we have seen with marine protected areas, and globalizations change also, for instance, in food habits, in food systems. And there are many challenges to overcome, such as food security, sustainability, and development aspirations. Monitoring and management, as well as interlinked and other types of challenges. So here we are in my last questions. The question is, if mollusk resources have been sought after for millennia on Atauro, as the diversity and abundance of shell middens throughout the island states, why cannot such a unique cultural and sustainable fisheries practices be part of the instruments that are used today to preserve biodiversity? Do we have to preserve only biological aspects? Is cultural aspects not needed to be preserved? The management practices and knowledge that have supported the high diversity of marine species today should be highlighted as an example to enhance biodiversity and sustainability. And local knowledge and local heritage should not influence only cultural policies, but also development and environmental policies. So what's next? The idea is to keep on carrying collaborative and inclusive research regarding Atauro society's interaction with the marine environment, to keep on working with Timorese students that I say hi from here, from Paris, with communities and staff from the Secretaría de Estado Arte y Cultura, in order to support cultural practices and local heritage in governance and policies. Agradeceu em Timor-Leste e eu fico com muita saudade de não ficar lá com você. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, Harry. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I miss a lot as well Timorese people, and especially people from Atauro, and also to thank them for receiving us, all of us working there very well, being very very supportive. So it has been a very good experience to work in Atauro. Originally, the next talk would be done by Laure Imperier and Dominique and Nicolas César. But I just consulted Catherine if she would like to talk before, because her paper is very connected with Ariadna's paper. So Catherine accepts to talk now. So we turn to Catherine's presentation, whose title is Coral Reef Management and Tarabando on Atauro Island, an ecologist's perspective. Thank you very much, Catherine, and please go ahead.
Okay, bon dia, bon noite. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Kelly, for inviting me to give a talk. It's very exciting to be with so many people who work in Timor-Leste. It's very, very, and I'm learning a lot. I'm not a, oops, I think that's the wrong one, isn't it? Let me try again. I'm learning a lot as I'm not are you guys seeing the share slide?
Yeah, yes, we are.
Okay, I'll just try one more time, and then otherwise I'll just do this maybe. That's good enough, I think. Okay, well, like I said, my name is Catherine. I'm so happy to be here and talk about my perspectives as an ecologist on Tarabando and how it's been used recently in coral reef management. Ariadna gave a very nice kind of background on what Tarabando is, so that's really great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my coral research first. I am doing my PhD in coral reef ecology at the University of Queensland in Australia. I'm from the United States, but I'm doing my PhD in Australia, and I'm currently writing that up. So I'm thinking about that quite a lot. And also just talk about how I kind of accidentally came across Tetabandu doing my fieldwork on the coral reefs, and kind of give a brief timeline of how that came, how the process of Tetabandu and Atauro. And I was really interested to kind of go visit some of the Tetabandu zones and kind of see what the, what the Tetabandu marine protected areas are actually protecting. So I'll talk a bit about that, challenges, and then future directions. So like Ariadna nicely described, that Timor-Leste is in a very marine biodiverse area of the world. In fact, it's the area of highest biodiversity. This area is known as the Coral Triangle. So it's 6 countries, including Timor-Leste. And you can see in the, where Timor is, this kind of hashed out areas, it's in this paper, it declares it's a data deficient zone. So we actually don't know very much about Timor-Leste's marine environments comparatively to other places. And so I first came to Timor in 2014 to do fieldwork for a large project where we went and surveyed coral reefs all along the North Coast. And then that was right at the beginning of my PhD. So then I decided to focus on coral reef ecology in Timor. And so I came back 2015, 2017. I also came back last year to do some fieldwork, focusing more on the Tetabandu aspect. And that's where I met Kelly, and I also met Ariadna. So that was really wonderful to meet other researchers as well. And then, so just a little bit about, so the coral surveys that I did were in 4 sites. So Beloy, Dilly Rock, Crystal Ray, and Bayhow, and I'll touch on that briefly. But then the places that I was kind of focused on for the Tetabandu, considering Tetabandu in marine conservation, was Adara, Beloy, and then Vila. So really quick, I have to show one graph about my coral research. And so this is all the 4 surveys I did in 2015, or 3 surveys, excuse me, in 2015, 2017, and 2019. And just focusing on the kind of red here is coral. And the main takeaway is that coral is variable, highly variable, between different areas where you go in Timor. And Beloy is a very high coral cover site comparatively to some other places. And I think there's this idea that Timor is a pristine marine environment, which is in some cases true, but it's highly variable. And as many of you probably know, subsistence livelihoods doesn't mean that there's zero impact on the environment. So I think that was one of the takeaways that I'm looking from my coral research. And then just I wanted to point out that one of the key findings from my thesis is that I also deployed temperature loggers in those 4 sites between end of 2015 through 2017. And that year, the 2016 through 2017 was was an El Nino year, which had global impacts. And one of those impacts was that it caused mass coral bleaching across the world. So in places like Hawaii and the Great Barrier Reef and the Maldives was very severely impacted by this bleaching event. But in Timor and the Coral Triangle more generally, not as much research was done, and so the impacts of coral bleaching were not as known. But from my temperature data, you can see here that the red is the CRW is satellite sea surface temperature. So satellites that are measuring the surface temperature of the ocean, and then the other 3 colors are the temperature loggers that I put in the reef for all this time. And you can see the takeaway is during the monsoon season from November, December to April, May of both years, there is a big gap between the red and then the other colors. And that's really significant because this blue line is when scientists expect that bleaching is going to happen. And so when the temperature goes above this blue line, that means there's likely to be bleaching. And so it's a very significant difference. And so the satellites are actually overestimating the bleaching in Timor-Leste, which is a good thing because that means coral bleaching from ocean warming is not as much of a threat as it is in other places in the world. So in terms of ocean warming, Timor-Leste is a climate refugium, which is, I think it kind of indicates that conservation efforts should, there's an opportunity to really focus on local impacts of, fishing, gleaning, et cetera, and understanding how those could managing those could further conserve coral reefs into the future. And with that, my objectives for this work was to investigate Tedobandu as a means of marine conservation. I wanted to characterize the habitats, and I also did that resurvey, which I showed in the graph, so I'm not going to talk about that too much anymore. And I also want to mention that my field trip last year was funded by the Scientific Exploration Society, so that's how I was able to do that work. So very big thanks to them. And a little more just about like Timorese connections to the sea. So I guess there's this idea that the Timorese, through the Indonesian occupation and other, in other ways, have kind of lost some of their traditional customs as to how they manage their marine resources, and compared to, how Tedobandu has functioned on land. And so I think that's kind of an interesting point. But then, in recent years, like in the last decade or so, it's had a large resurgence. Okay, so then really briefly, the kind of timeline of Tedobandu marine protected areas on Atauro. So Atauro, which is a village on the west side of the island, the Tedobandu MPA zone was established around May of 2016. And from my perspective, the two aims of the Tedobandu zones were, one, to, as Ariadna mentioned, no one is allowed to fish in these zones. And you can see, this is a sign in Adada. And so they have this red zone that's no take. And then they have this kind of buffer area. But in the red zone, no one is allowed to fish or glean. And then the second aim is kind of for income for the community. So when foreigners come, tourists come, divers come, they pay a $2 fee that goes to a community fund. And so that's kind of the two objectives of the Tedobandu zone. So Adada was the first one. And then the reason why I came to hear about Tedobandu was because when I came back in 2017, in July of 2017, I came back to go back to my site in Beloy, and then people started telling me, it's like, oh, there's a Tedobandu MPA there now. Like now you have to pay a fee, XYZ. And then I was just like, oh, what's Tedobandu? Like this wasn't here, in 2015 when I came. So like, what's happening? And so that was kind of how I'm like, oh, it's customary law. And that's kind of how I got accidentally introduced to it, because my site just happened to be, it's Haruina. So that's right in where the area was protected. And so then about a year later, Vila also created an MPA zone. And then by the end of last year, almost all of the communities have had established an MPA zone. And so there's kind of this sort of exponential increase in, the implementation of this practice. And I think that's in part because of how successful the Adada MPA zone was in terms of, I think it, in a year, it would raise about $1,000 for the community, which is a significant amount of money that the community was able to use. So I think that's one reason that we saw this increase of Tedobandu MPA zones. But one thing to mention is that it is a pretty crowded space, I suppose. Like I think World Fish was very instrumental in working with Adada, and I think they've been working with the DARP beforehand to implement a fishing aggregation device, which I won't go into, but they have kind of this long-standing relationship. And then Adada, the community, decided to get together and create the MPA zone. And then after that, I think Conservation International was more involved in the establishment of the other remaining MPA zones. And so there is a bit of competition in terms of, NGOs that are involved in this space. And also like on this website, there's this is the website of Conservation International, and it's saying that, we are establishing this MPA network of Tedobandu zones. But then if you look like on the Coral Triangle website, it's another NGO based in Bali. They're saying they're also finalizing this, Atauro Island MPA management plan. So it's a bit like, there are multiple actors involved. And then from my perspective, like the local key, having local champions within the villages and the communities were, key into, communicating to the communities why, they should consider doing Tedobandu zones. And I think, in Dada, that was Super Mario, definitely, having a chat with him. It seemed like he's also partially works for World Fish. and is a key community member with the guest house as well. And then in Vila, of course, they have their Roman Luan NGO that's based there as well. And so kind of one thing that kind of struck me was that they're the communities, it's not a huge island, but they're very, very diverse, which I probably don't have to stress to all of you social scientists, but it struck me as a biologist, I suppose, like even just with the fishing, like in Adara, it's a very coordinated sort of every morning, the whole community gets together and goes fishing. But then like in other, bigger communities like Beloy and Vila, it's not as quite, coordinated, like people kind of, it's more kind of in a family individualistic level of people going fishing and things like that. And also just with, ease of access. Like I really would have liked to get to, a Crema or like Makili, but it's very difficult to get there. And so I think, especially considering that with tourism, like it's difficult if you've never been to Timor-Leste and you want to go, but like you're probably going to be limited to the areas that are more easily accessed. And also something I'll talk about a little bit later is where the dive operators go as well. Okay, so just again, another thing I wanted to highlight is that, the east coast of Atauro and then the west coast in terms of the marine habitats are very different as well. The west coast is kind of characterized by this gentle slope, and then after 100 or 200 meters, it drops off to it's like a cliff underwater. Versus on the east coast, it's much more kind of, it does have another gentle sloping, but it doesn't have this steep drop off as much as the west coast, and so that's kind of based on wind patterns and wave patterns and things like that. The west and the east are quite different, and also in the north and the south ends of the island. Depending on the time of year, it can be quite dangerous to go diving there because the currents can be quite strong and not kind of the environment you want to go diving in. And so one thing, I was really keen to see what these different environments looked like. And so one thing that kind of surprised me in Adara was the area right in front of the village looks something like, this picture. But to me, as an ecologist, it looks, coral reef ecologist, it looks quite bare in terms of, that I would expect more coral to be, on a reef. And so this was the area right in front of the village. Like you just walk out and swim all the way to the edge, and it's very bare in some areas. And so I guess in thinking about this, it does make sense because as if community members want to go fishing or gleaning, they probably frequent the closest places to their communities more often than walking up and down the beach. And also I think before the Terubandu was implemented in Adara, they also would drag the boats up onto the beach after they fish. And so I guess after, consistent, dragging the boats off and consistent in gleaning and fishing, to me, it looks like it has impacted the corals in that right in front of the reef. And it does get better as you go, move north or south from right in front of the village. There is more coral and soft coral, so to speak. So that was something that did surprise me, but then it does kind of make sense if you think about it. And so this is kind of the walls that I was talking about in Adara. So it kind of comes with that nice, not too deep water, maybe 5 meters, but then it'll just suddenly go off a cliff. And so this is what divers come to Adara for, is for this environment, because it's as you can see, it's quite spectacular. But also there's just signs of, on the right photo, you can see it looks very rubbly and kind of rocky. And, to me, that's kind of an indication that this was the area of blast fishing at some point in the past. So as many of you probably know, blast fishing was much more common during the Indonesian occupation. And now it's not so much used, but there are remnants of, the damage that was left behind as well. And then Vila, one thing about that I didn't appreciate before I went to these different areas is that, the marine habitats are also very different. And so Vila also actually has quite a lot of seagrass. The seagrass extent is like 100 to 150 meters before you even get to the reef. So on the right, you can see this nice corals and a nice pretty reef. But that, I had to swim out, quite a ways to even get to the coral. And similarly, Beloy is the same. Because they're both on the eastern side. So you can see here, even all of this in the first, few hundred meters or so is all seagrass, and the reef only starts, when you get out to here. And then one thing to also note is that Haruina is actually a barrier reef, kind of like the Great Barrier Reef. It's not actually attached to shore. So the reef here would be a fringing reef because it just sort of extends off of the shore. But as a barrier reef, Haruina is pretty much disconnected from, land. And so I think that also indicates that is one reason why, as a reef, it's very beautiful. It has very high coral cover, and it's everything is very much intact. It's probably, as I would think, that as it has been for a very long time. Just because it is separated, it's a bit less inaccessible in terms of gleaning and things like that. It's more difficult to access. Okay, right. So challenges. So one thing that I realized after, looking at this, thinking about this for us, is that working, communication is key between, the communities and, the tourism operators specifically, because they're kind of the middlemen. They're the people who are bringing all the tourists, most of the tourists, to dive in these, Terabando MPAs, etc. And so that's something that, and I think in general, the feeling that I got was that, the dive operators are very much on board and, supporting this initially, etc. There is some frustration around, there's some confusion as to, what's the best way to pay, that sort of thing. Like there isn't a great, a defined payment system yet. And there's kind of been some discussions around whether there should be an annual fee. But then because like Adara and Beloy are generally kind of the hubs of scuba diving on the island anyway. Communities down in Makili and Makadade and, up north in Akema, they're not seeing the tourism income from the Terabando MPA coming directly to them because the dive operators don't go there that often, because sometimes it's dangerous to go, to the north and south. And then they have, most of the operations like accommodations and all those things are the hubs are Adara and Beloy. So that's just kind of the way the logistics are. And so just in general, like sometimes there can be conflicts between the, tourism operators and then the communities. Like I heard from another student who's working on Atauro Island who was looking at gleaning, that she was telling me that one of the community, I think it was Makili, they were convinced that one of the dive operators had cut one of these boobor traps that's pictured, in the background. And so they were of course, they were very upset about it because, it takes lots of time to create these traps and they're very important to the communities. But when I heard that, I was fairly certain that like the dive operators were not, intentionally cutting, these traps or anything. And just knowing that, the currents can be very strong on Atauro. And like if the currents are strong and this fish cage is getting bashed around, it could very likely, like the currents have, taken it and dragged it out down to the depths of the ocean, and it wasn't actually one of these tourism operators. But I guess because the dive operators are the only other people that really go to these areas, they kind of conflated that the dive operators cut our traps and we're not pleased about it. So yeah, there can be some conflicts between the dive operators and the communities from what I observed. And also just as an individual, so as someone who is just snorkeling and trying to experience the Terabando marine environments, as a tourist on my own, I found it very difficult to, like, I only was aware that I needed to pay a fee because I knew about this whole process, but but it was very untransparent as to who actually one should pay the Terabando fee to, and like exactly how much. Like, is it every time you jump in the water, like you're supposed to pay $2, like etc., or is it per day? And so in the end, when I was staying in some of the different villages, I would just kind of leave money at the accommodation and just ask them to give it to whoever I was supposed to get the Terabando fee. So that was from personal experience. It's a bit untransparent. And just lastly, really quick, this is a figure from a paper that's called Coral Reef in the Anthropocene. And it basically just highlights that we can no longer solely focus on, in terms of coral reefs, predicting coral reefs, managing coral reefs, only focus on, biophysical parameters like wave energy or seawater temperature, etc. like we moved into this Anthropocene where it's, you know, this tangled web of, you know, CO2 emissions, trade, and commercial fisheries, invasive species. And in order to properly manage and think about, you know, what is happening onto, you know, the reefs ecologically, you need to consider the sociological aspects, socio-ecological aspects as well. So the phrase they came up with was this socio-ecological macroecology. It's like, you know, that's what how we should be thinking about coral reefs in, you know, the future of Anthropocene. And with that, I think I've gone over time. So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So we now pass to the last presentation of the second section of our panel. That is to be done by Laure Imperer, who will present a paper written by herself and with Dominique Grillat and Nicolas César. The paper is entitled Contributions of Local Population to the Conservation of Biodiversity on the Islands of Atauro. Laure, please go ahead.
Sim, muito obrigada, Kelly. Eu vou ceder aqui. Dá para ver a apresentação?
Sim, estamos vendo.
Espera, deixa só pôr em modo global. Sim, aí, tá bom?
Ótimo, perfeito.
Olha, eu queria só começar por agradecer, primeiro, me desculpar, mas também faz parte fazer essa apresentação em português. Eu não sei o teto e meu inglês está bastante fraco. Primeiro, eu queria agradecer de coração a gentileza de todo o comitê organizador do congresso em resolver pequenos problemas e tudo. Isso é um fato importante. O que eu quero abordar, o que queremos abordar, é a questão das relações entre uma comodificação da biodiversidade via o desenvolvimento e os aspectos patrimoniais que são locais. Eu acho que essa foto ilustra bastante essa problemática, porque aqui estamos numa vertente do Monte Manucoco, que é um monte sagrado, e o que vocês veem é que as árvores grandes da vegetação nativa, as árvores que tinham um significado local, foram derrubadas para dar lugar a plantios de café e também as árvores introduzidas que acompanham esses plantios de café. Então, é toda essa tensão que eu quero explorar. A apresentação resulta de um trabalho coletivo, interdisciplinar, integrado no programa POPEI, já comentado. A Dominique está no avião, o Nicolas deve estar na sala virtual e poderá intervir, obviamente. Atauro, eu acho importante talvez ressaltar em outros termos esse pequeno mapa, mas é apenas uma ilha de 22 sobre 10 quilômetros e que tem uma população estimada em 8.000 habitantes. Leite de Magalhães, em 2016, ela veia a ilha, no seu futuro, no seu projeto de desenvolvimento, como coberta de plantios, não de café, mas de coqueiros, de arequeiras, de tabaco para venda, isso para comércio, para produção de renda para os colonos, e também de milho e de arroz para consumo local. Agora, tem outro projeto que visa a investir num intenso turismo fundamentado na biodiversidade marinha e terrestre. A Catherine acabou de ressaltar isso, com o plano de acolher vários milhares de turistas. Então, é uma nova capitalização, que é a palavra usada por Leite de Magalhães, que hoje se chamaria comodificação, sobre a biodiversidade local, que é concebida como um recurso econômico que está em obras e que leva apenas marginalmente em consideração o significado e os valores locais a ela associados. Em paralelo, o Estado de Timor-Leste investe fortemente em políticas de patrimônio como alavanca cultural para um turismo, através de objetos artesanais e locais emblemáticos, vê a apresentação da Ana Carolina, Porém, o bem cultural representado pela biodiversidade permanece oculto. Se torna objeto de conservação em áreas protegidas, como manucoco de 4.000 hectares, ou fonte de matéria-prima. Mas políticas específicas que valorizem a riqueza das relações entre uma sociedade múltipla, timorense e seu meio ambiente ainda estão a ser construídas. Além do mais, em um contexto de grande vulnerabilidade ecológica e de uma globalização que gera seus próprios modelos de desenvolvimento, é urgente reconhecer o papel das populações locais que, através de suas práticas e saberes, contribuem para a existência de uma biodiversidade intimamente ligada a uma sociedade e ao seu território. O alarme 1 a mais foi lançado em 2019 na última plenária do IBES. Mas eu posso lembrar outro elemento de cunho global, é que 28% das terras emergidas do planeta estão gerenciadas por populações tradicionais e que essas terras estão em bem melhor estado de conservação que as terras adjacentes. Eu não tenho a referência em cabeça, mas posso enviar se estiverem interessados. Então, tentaremos mostrar em que as relações entre sociedade e biodiversidade em Atauro são um componente fundamental do patrimônio cultural imaterial da ilha. Os dados que vou analisar provêm de umas 3 estadias em Macadate, realizada entre 2016 e 2018, onde coletei, com o apoio da Dominique para questões de língua, os nomes, usos, localizações, modo de governança das plantas e outros aspectos relevantes. O Nicolas também fez 2 estadias a respeito do mel, e o trabalho de campo foi bem articulado com as pesquisas sobre territorialidades. Disso resultou uma base de dados de 150 plantas com as variedades, com suas fotografias e nomes. E ressalto a importância da documentação fotográfica, aqui, como a Dana mostrou, da documentação etnomusicológica, como material a ser devolvido às comunidades locais. Então, o problema foi como analisar essa biodiversidade. Tem formas de análise que são bem conhecidas, bem praticadas, como aquela que você vê embaixo à esquerda, que são usos, recursos materiais e imateriais. Isso é um fato bem estabelecido, plantas alimentares, medicinais, etc. Há de ressaltar que tem muito poucos dados sobre a biodiversidade em Atauro. Então, procurei identificar quais poderiam ser os temas transversais e relevantes que atravessam esse conjunto de plantas, esse conjunto de dados que coletei. E apareceram 4 temas que me parecem dar uma certa estrutura e significados ao conjunto de plantas. É a questão das origens e temporalidades, começarei por esse, a questão das complementaridades entre cultivado e espontâneo, ou já falado aspecto dos usos, e as práticas sociais de governança, que levam a uma governança diferenciada das plantas. Então, começando pelas origens e temporalidades, eu indicarei que as plantas são marcadores de trajetórias míticas e históricas. A primeira árvore da humanidade é o munga, um ficus, provavelmente Ficus variegata, cujos frutos que você vê na foto à direita foram comidos por um porco que se transformou em mulher, que deu luz a 3 irmãos, e construíram, como Gabriel e Dominique mostraram, a ilha de Atauro, que lançaram uma armadilha no mar, na qual encontraram folhas de mangueira e folhas de bambu, o que mostrou que não era mais o mar, mas a ilha mesmo, a ilha terrestre que estava se constituindo. Então, essas plantas e outras, tem melancia, tem outras plantas, marcam essas trajetórias. Tem plantas que são marcadores de uma organização social, que são o lari, hai, tem um nome em Hatlungu e um nome em Tetum, tem o luli, o tafulu, que são nomes de grupos clânicos, e tem outros nomes que estão sendo mais explorados, como o haru, o aikfau, ou a arana ou raça, uma mangueira, que indica grupos de descendência. Então, os nomes de plantas carregam muitos significados. E tem outros também com nomes de lugares, etc. Mas não dava para marcar tudo. Outro aspecto importante que se refere à noção de origem, uma origem que é uma origem biogeográfica, que é uma origem geopolítica, mas que é reinterpretada localmente também. É a diversidade de origem das plantas cultivadas em Atauro. Um grupo de plantas constituído, o que está enquadrado marrom no meio da foto, pelo sorgo, pelo painço, pela lágrima de Job, não sei bem como chama, Batafatuk, Tora e Etan, que são plantas que são cereais consideradas como dos antigos. Tem outro grupo de plantas que remete provavelmente a povoamentos ainda mais antigos, com banana e tajá em português, talas em indonesiano. E depois vem todos os outros aportes ao longo das histórias, plantas trazidas pelos colonizadores, e que é interessante que essas plantas não apenas permeiam a agricultura, as plantas cultivadas, mas permeiam, como vimos também com a primeira foto com as plantas para a sombra, permeiam o ambiente florestal. Tem muitas introduções de plantas, principalmente pelos indonesianos, que são plantas para fornecer lenha, para fornecer madeira de lei, sombreamento, alimentos também, que faz parte da paisagem vegetal de Atauro. E também a questão das origens das temporalidades, ela é colocada no dia a dia, não se refere só aos mitos ou a grandes histórias, mas as plantas, esse é um vigna, um feijãozinho, que se sabe que ele existia, foi perdido, voltou pela Indonésia em Atauro. Tem a jicama, esqueci o nome em Tetum, desculpe, um tubérculo que foi introduzido, dizem foi introduzido pelos indonesianos. E tem até as plantas invasoras, e isso remete ao texto, que têm uma história de origem, que seria uma ação da ONU para uma história complicada de plantas invasoras em cima de plantas invasoras, que o McWilliam analisa também. Então, toda planta remete, ou quase toda, remete a uma história de origem e a uma certa época. Um outro eixo de análise é a complementaridade, os ajustes que existem entre o silvestre e o cultivado. Numa das primeiras apresentações que eu fiz em Dili, na Fundação Oriente, eu tinha colocado isso como um gradiente. Mas eu acho que a gente não está numa história de gradiente. Estamos numa imbricação de significados e de práticas entre o silvestre e o cultivado. Estamos bastante longe da diferenciação que tem entre os instrumentos de políticas públicas que se referem ou ao que é espontâneo ou ao que é cultivado. Um exemplo bastante falante disso são os feijões, que são de uma extrema riqueza em Atauro, com várias espécies e variedades mobilizadas, e tem um grupo de feijão, que são aqueles 3 representados à esquerda, que fazem parte do grupo de feijão, porém que são considerados como silvestres, e que são comidos com os feijões cultivados, no sentido mais comum da palavra cultivar. E esses feijões são silvestres porque eles são tóxicos, precisam ser cozinhados várias vezes na água, e também eles se ressemeiam por eles mesmos. Tá? Isso é um exemplo dentre as plantas cultivadas. Mas há também uma intricação ligada em situações, muitas vezes, de vulnerabilidade, com plantas alimentares florestais. Tem o aiquá, o canário, que é uma planta central nos recursos florestais, tem cogumelos, mushroom, os culat, tem um cipó que dá uma semente grande representada à direita, que é também cozinhada várias vezes e que serve de alimentos em tempo de precariedades. Tem os cumbili, que são os dioscórea, uns inhame enormes, que são vendidos no mercados, mas que são coletados na floresta e que provavelmente a presença na floresta resulta de antigos cultivos que hoje foram abandonados como cultivos. Então, sempre se vê essa imbricação entre cultivado e silvestre. Outro grupo de plantas que dá conta dessa imbricação desculpa, eu estou perdendo minha fala, são as palmeiras. Palmeiras absolutamente fundamentais na vida cotidiana, que são protegidas, às vezes plantadas, mas principalmente espontâneas, que crescem por elas mesmas. Tá? Tem o acacali, o corifa, que dá fibras e que dá fécula, âmido. E tem, sobretudo em Atauro, o acadiru, que fornece o tuac, o vinho de palmeira, que é um elemento fundamental da vida social e que dá frutas também, que podem ser consumidos em tempos de maior precariedade. Passando à terceira categoria de análise, eu não vou entrar em detalhes, porque todo mundo conhece essas grandes categorias de uso. Eu representei apenas em Macadade essa senhora que está fazendo tecelagem de fibras de corifa utan para fazer tais tradicionais para serem vendidas no mercado turístico, através de uma associação que está se constituindo, que já se constituiu em Macadade, mas tem plantas medicinais, tem plantas ictiotóxicas para a pesca, tem plantas tintoriais, as madeiras, a lenha, etc. Todas as categorias que vocês conhecem bem de uso das plantas. E sobre os quais essa abordagem sobre o uso é geralmente a única abordagem, que é uma abordagem sobre recurso, que é vista pelas políticas públicas. A planta, o outro recurso, o mel, como recurso, e não como objeto carregado de significados. O último aspecto que eu queria mencionar é aquele das práticas sociais que permitem a existência dessa diversidade de planta. Repousam principalmente sobre uma dissociação muito forte entre o espaço, suporte da planta, e o recurso. Um caso emblemático é dado pela arrequeira, cujos frutos mastigados com cal e betel, com piper betel, têm propriedades estimulantes e são um elemento central do bem-estar social. Há a possibilidade, e há vários casos, mas não é muito, de terem plantio de areca, de bua, na escala individual, que são propriedades individuais sem maior interferência com o resto da sociedade. Porém, há outros lugares no entorno de Macadade que são florestas de arrequeiras, muitas vezes misturado com coqueiros, que estão em territórios clânicos coletivos. E dentro desses territórios clânicos coletivos, desse território clânico coletivo, as famílias têm suas próprias arrequeiras que são marcadas por traço, a propriedade de marca no tronco, como vocês veem, o supõe, não é muito visível, na foto em cima à direita, onde você vê um X marcado no tronco. Há interdições tarabando de colheita marcada por uma arrumação de folhas de palmeira em torno do tronco da palmeira, mas esses plantios eles são vigiados por um guardião que avalia o estado de amadurecimento das frutas, até propor a realização de uma grande manifestação, no geral em julho, a qual vão todos, grande parte dos habitantes da ilha, e tem gente que vem de Dili nesse tempo, cada participante da festa recebe um certo número de grão de milho que marca o número de arrequeiras de pé que ele tem, que simboliza o número de arrequeiras que ele tem. Tem apanhadores das frutas de arrequeiras que vão subir nas árvores, colher os cachos de frutas, e os proprietários, em função do número de grãos que eles têm, vão remunerar o guardião com um certo número de cachos de fruta. Eles vão remunerar também os apanhadores com 1 ou 2 cachos de fruta, dependendo das relações. O que é importante ver é que tem uma redistribuição, de uma certa forma, entre vários grupos da colheita de areca. Tá? Esses mecanismos de redistribuição, no meu ver, não faz parte dos comuns, porque não são formalizados da mesma maneira, mas mereceria uma abordagem mais aprofundada. Esse tipo de manejo e de dissociação entre o território e o recurso que está em cima se encontra também, aqui uma foto à esquerda de um plantio de areca, mas se encontra também em relação a outras espécies, como o bambu, que são umas espécies muito centrais na economia local. O bambu é utilizado para fazer canalizações, quando tem água, é utilizado para casa, é utilizado como recipiente, provavelmente em instrumentos de música, eu não prestei atenção dada, mas eu acho que eles fazem parte também dessas matérias-primas, e eles são também instrumentos de um comércio. Um bambu de 10 metros, de 4 metros de altura, um pedaço de bambu de 4 metros de altura, me parece que é vendido 4 ou 5 dólares, uma quantia expressiva de dinheiro. Então, essas formas de manejo também movimentam a economia da ilha. Voltando para a areca, eu acho que dentro das palmeiras, 4 palmeiras simbolizam, marcam modelos de relações entre plantas e sociedades. Não vou entrar em detalhes, mas você tem plantas que são cultivadas, plantas que são protegidas e silvestres. Tem os usos, tem graus de domesticação diferentes, tem histórias recentes, antigas, que precisam ainda aprofundar. Provavelmente o Talimetan é a palmeira mais antiga manejada. Tem regimes de apropriações diferentes, modos de transmissão ainda que devem ser aprofundados, e formas de saberes especializados ou mais leigos que orientam a exploração do recurso. Eu acho que as palmeiras são um grupo de plantas essencial, bom, isso já foi mostrado por Fox e outros autores, para pensar relações entre biodiversidade e sociedade. Mas tem outro grupo, outro conjunto, que é o conjunto ligado à exploração do mel, que faz objetos de governança particular. Como o Nicolas poderia mais falar sobre isso, mas tem também essas 2 escalas, individuais e coletivas. A espécie que é explorada é a Apis dorsata, que é uma espécie migratória que dá um recurso muito cobiçado, antes a cera e hoje o mel, que também é objeto de comércio. E as estratégias, seja individual, seja coletiva, mostram um conhecimento extremamente acurado sobre a ecologia dessa Apis dorsata. Então, tem 2 estratégias. A estratégia individual visa atrair enxames em lugares específicos acessíveis. E isso se dá também preparando um pau, uma tábua, no qual o enxame vai se fixar, e a pessoa que instalou esse pau e que tem a propriedade, entre aspas, do enxame, a exclusividade, mais do que a propriedade, protege também o entorno das colmeias, plantando ou manejando árvores para sombrear essa colmeia. E isso é uma marca de exclusividade, de ter plantado ou manejado árvores ou em torno do espaço da colmeia. E isso lhe dá direitos de propriedade exclusiva sobre o mel. A outra modalidade é uma modalidade muito mais territorializada, dentro de um território costumeiro, perto de Beral. Nas vertentes do monte Tutunairana, no sudoeste da ilha, as linhagens de Macadada e de Maker possuem territórios tradicionais. Eles têm a exclusividade do uso do que é presente aqui é o mel. São vales encaixados com grandes árvores que são protegidas e que acolhem cada ano esses enxames migratórios. Com a chegada das abelhas, o desenvolvimento dos favos do mel é cuidadosamente vigiado até o dia da coleta. E lá se trata também um pouco, como no caso da arrequeira, se trata de um evento de importância durante o qual as várias linhagens dos povoados se encontram para cortar os favos e distribuir o mel de modo equitável entre os participantes. Há também uma redistribuição dos recursos entre os participantes e os usuários desse território. São 7 vales que se repartem entre vários clãs. Eu queria concluir rapidamente sobre essa apresentação. Primeiro, sobre as políticas patrimoniais. Eu acho que os 4 eixos que desenvolvi rapidamente são pertinentes para mostrar, para dar uma perspectiva patrimonial sobre a diversidade biológica. Porém, ele não esgota as possibilidades de abordagem. Precisa desenvolver mais a questão da cartografia espacial, das plantas utilizadas, das condições de acesso, dos possíveis conflitos. Eu acho que uma abordagem comparativa, linguística, sobre a fitonimia na escala da ilha seria extremamente reveladora da história e das trajetórias das plantas, aí também de se interrogar sobre as suas vulnerabilidades e suas perenidades. Em relação às dinâmicas socioambientais, ao contrário do que aparece na maior parte da literatura, eu acho que tem uma riqueza biológica, conceitual e técnica sobre a biodiversidade em Atauro. E a constituição desse corpus de dados sobre as contribuições das populações locais à existência, à conservação e à dinâmica da biodiversidade deve ser continuado, talvez juntando com outros objetos de estudo, as abelhas ou os moluscos, como comentou a Ariadna. Eu acho que tem que pensar a riqueza biológica existente como uma contribuição dos povos locais. Há que desenvolver, de proteger, as formas locais de conservação da biodiversidade e não sempre implementar novas formas de conservação. Refletir, pelo menos, sobre a articulação entre os dois. A questão da contribuição econômica, a troca em dinheiro, também deve ser reforçado, em vez de sempre pensar em substituir. Ao mel, bambu, materiais de construção, de alimentação, os serviços ambientais, os serviços de conservação de recursos fitogenéticos, tudo isso faz parte das contribuições das populações locais. Bom, isso são categorias bastante genéricas, mas não menos importante por isso. Ver a relevância e a pertinência do saber nessa conservação, no bem-estar das populações, pensar que as categorizações locais da biodiversidade, que as categorizações políticas da biodiversidade não correspondem às perspectivas locais, daí uma série de ambiguidades na implementação de políticas públicas, e que as perspectivas patrimoniais sobre a diversidade biológica permitiria articular políticas culturais, agrícolas e ambientais em um novo conjunto de dados que assegure a viabilidade e a continuidade dessa riqueza de relações entre sociedade e ambiente em Atauro. Muito obrigada pela atenção.
Muito obrigada, Ló. Você pode minimizar sua tela, por favor?
Estou procurando aonde que eu posso tirar meu... Bom, vou tirar aqui.
Ótimo, muito obrigada.
Desculpe.
Muito obrigada. So thank you very much, Laura, and Dominique and Nicolas for your very interesting paper. We now pass to the debate part of our second section. So I'd like to give you time to put questions. People in Dili, people just watching our panel by internet, please go ahead. You can talk your question, or you can write your question on the chat. Sim, Ló.
Sim, eu tenho uma pergunta, bueno, em espanhol, para Ariadna.
Ok.
Se ela tem dados sobre como as estratégias de coleta, de busca de molusco se integram em estratégias globais de produção de recursos no âmbito da família, da unidade doméstica. Em outros termos, como coleta de molusco se articula com a agricultura e outras atividades terrestres, entre aspas.
Thank you, Laura. Can I answer in English?
Sure.
So, if I understand well, the question is, how does this practice of molluscan fisheries articulate with larger forms of food production systems in Atauro or in the world? So, the fact is that molluscan fisheries, and this is not only in Atauro, but in many other countries in the world, are not looked after in a daily basis, but they have to, when we go look for shells, people have to assess what are all the types of products that are in that moment. For instance, in Indonesia, what I saw is that when there were the durian, the time of the durian, nobody went to look for shells, nobody went fishing, everybody was eating durian the whole day. So this is highly interconnected. The production of some agriculture with the production of other form of food systems with molluscan resources. But what is important to highlight is that molluscans play a key role in times of shortage. When there's not much to eat, when there's where the sea is very rough and people cannot eat, there are always mollusks. And people say, who doesn't want to eat is because they are lazy, because mollusks are always there. I don't know if
Ari, and if I can, I would just add another information, I think, about it, women involvement in this kind of fishery, that I think it has also a recreative function. Lots of time I just met people in the beach, they were just halima, as they say, just playing. They don't have other things to do, so they go there to catch some mollusks and to cook the mollusk in the beach, like to have like a kind of a picnic over there. It's very interesting, yes. So Renata, would you like to share your question? Laura, is a question to you. Can you read?
Deixa eu ver onde que está a Renata.
Is a question.
Infelizmente, I did not see any agricultural ritual.
Então, a Renata diz o seguinte, Ló, achei muito interessante a relação entre os nomes de territórios e alimentos. Notei que o termo bata aparece 3 vezes. Você acompanhou as cerimônias rituais agrícolas?
Não, eu não acompanhei cerimônias rituais agrícolas. Olha, a questão do termo bata aparecer 3 vezes é porque eu coloquei os nomes em tetum. Eu não quis colocar em Hatlungu, que eu acho que não deve ter muitos falantes de Hatlungu, nem eu, ainda menos na sala, nem nos nomes científicos, que são outro. Então, eu optei por usar os termos em tetum, mas se você pegar os nomes em Hatlungu, não é o mesmo nome para designar sorgo, para designar painço e para designar coix. Tá? Isso é um artefato de translação, de tradução.
Okay. Great. So I have a question. Before having your question, I'd like to put a question to Catherine. Catherine, you suggested that the subsistence fishery have also an impact on the environment. So could you share with us what are the main impacts of subsistence fishery? Any, like, I would say, some positive and some negative impacts of what you're calling subsistence fisheries, please?
Great. Yeah, great question. I'm not, I haven't researched this area quite a lot, but kind of from observations. But I guess just in general, like for coral reefs in particular, like, you know, stepping on corals or touching corals is, you know, can damage the coral. And if it's too much, it can, you know, kill the corals. So it's, you know, in very tourist heavy areas, like in like Hawaii, for example, you know, they tell the tourists who are snorkeling, like, don't stand on the corals, you know, it's bad for them, that sort of thing. But then, you know, if you're in like an intertidal sort of gleaning environment where, you know, to get, you know, like Ariadna showed, you have to work very hard and pry these things off the rocks. And it's, you know, you would involve, you know, potentially, you know, walking on the coral. So that's one thing, I suppose, that I guess as a coral reef ecologist, that's, you know, one of my main concerns perhaps. But I guess, but also in like, just from the other surveys that I've done, like Dili Rock, many of you are probably familiar. It's very, like, I noticed that particular site, it had the lowest coral cover at 5 meters, like very low, like 5%, but also that was the most, just, you know, as I was diving and observing throughout the day, that was the site where the most people were in terms of swimming, fishing, you know, nets, and people gleaning as well, women and children gleaning. So just kind of from, like, I wasn't actively collecting data and, you know, gleaning, how much gleaning was being done at my 4 different sites, but just sort of observationally, I was like, that's interesting. This site has the most people, you know, recreating and fishing and, you know, gleaning, and the coral cover at 5 meters, which is, you know, quite, it's not too deep. It's still accessible at diving, you know, free diving and things. It's also, you know, the lowest. So I guess that's just from my experience doing field work. And also with the like woodward traps, also like that picture I showed was from Cristo Rey. And I think when I was there in last year, I think someone was telling me that they come from Atauro actually, and they put the traps in Cristo Rey because it's easier to sell at the markets in Dili. But then I think the trap usage there has been increasing recently. But then as I mentioned, you know, depending on, you know, it can be quite active in terms of, you know, water movement sometimes, like those big traps moving around on the reef, you know, can damage, you know, the reef as well. So I guess that's kind of, you know, my perspectives in terms of some impacts. And I guess in other places in the world, again, not being an expert by any means, but, you know, they have seasonal closures and things like that in terms of, you know, particular organisms they don't harvest at certain times of year because of, you know, breeding cycles, those sorts of things, which I don't get the impression that in Timor-Leste there are those sorts of traditional management of, you know, not collecting certain things in certain times of the year. But again, that's sort of my observations.
Great, thank you very much. So I pass now to a question presented by Helen Hill. She first said she liked very much all the presentations and that all the presentations are very useful for developing pedagogical materials for education in Istimo. So her question is about the impact of permaculture training center in Atauro. So the question, I think, is for everyone involved in the panel. So have any of you been to the village of Atauro on the other side of Atauro from Dili, where the permaculture group from Balcão and Macau have a permaculture training center operated by a couple of villages? So does
Yes.
anyone has any?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I was in Atauro and I saw the permaculture activities being done, but actually I didn't see the center still working a lot in the educational side. Maybe it's the time that I went, there was nobody in the students in the center, but there were a lot of plants growing and it looks like the population had some advantage for this place. I think in the place I like it. I mean, it looks quite fit with the environment. It's not like a hotel with cement or blocks. It is quite good. The second question, I'm just gonna quickly answer the next questions that come out. So for the how do they take out the shells? Actually, they survey where there are little holes that give like bubbles. When they find these holes, and they are very, very small, very small, they would start digging with a little stick on the ground and move, and then they take them up the shell, and the use of this is Asaphis violensis, is a very known species that we eat in Atauro, but also in Timor. It's quite good. And for the question from Lisa Palmer, I would say that women in the villages, it's a very complicated questions, because actually, yes, some of the people agree that they want Tarabandu zones, but not everyone is capable to freely talk when they are not, when they do not agree. And this happens mostly in little spaces when there are not everybody around. I saw, for instance, people eating turtles. Yeah, this can be impressive for us as ecologists or as conservationists, that people eat turtles. Yes, people eat turtle, and it's a cultural food for many local societies. And when NGOs go there, they will say, no, we won't eat. But when you live in the village and you are there on a daily basis, you know that the people eat them. So we have to find points of accordance, like we say, like Lord say in her talk. And I just want to signal that Lord said something very important that maybe not all the people in the panel could understand, because it was in Portuguese. But most of the places where the highest diversity in the world are in indigenous and indigenous localities. So there's a connection between indigenous people and high biodiversity. And indigenous people have been working in the coral reef for hundreds, for dozens of years. And they are still quite good. And actually, they are some of the most impressive places of biodiversity are like in Atauro. If the people or the techniques that the Atauro people use for a long time would not be sustainable, we wouldn't have shells on this moment. Yeah, thank you. Ah, okay. Sorry. This is the last thing. Okay. This is very interesting. In Atauro, they have a way of, they take out the shell from, which is buried. They take out the shell and then they put it back in some places just to keep it there and make it grow. So they are doing like a maricultural strategy with shells, and they can put them up to 5 days to 1 month. So they wait until the shell gets bigger, and then they take it out and sell it in the market.
Great, thank you, Ari. I'd like to add just a comment to Helen's question about the permaculture activities in Atauro. So even I went to Atauro, but I was there just for a couple of days. But when I went to other places like Arlo or Bikeli, I saw some nurseries. Some nurseries for trees and other species, and all these nurseries, they were done by Permatil in Atauro. In Uaruana, there were some of them as well. And so I think that the activities done by non-governmental institutions in Dili is also having a kind of effect on biodiversity in Atauro, I would say. They are a new actor bringing new species over there, and also to nourishing a kind of new disposition maybe among people about to have vegetable gardens. So I just remember, for example, the lost paper that I read yesterday, it started with an observation from the Portuguese, a Portuguese colonizer suggesting that there wasn't vegetable gardens in Atauro when he first visited there. And in fact, there is not a lot. I would say there is very little vegetable gardens in Atauro. But people, at least in Subemaço, people are willing to develop more than. Because, for example, if it's very... so most of the vegetables people eat, at least in Subemaço, comes from Dili. So all, for example, carrots, potatoes, lots of non-local vegetables people are buying in the market. But at the same time, they are excited about to plant these vegetables there. So I think there is a space to work with people about their involvement with this kind of development there. So, Laura, please go ahead.
Obrigada, Kili. Eu queria reforçar dos aspectos levantados pela doutora Ellen, não só de políticas públicas de desenvolvimento, entre aspas, mas da necessidade absoluta de novas formações para mais transversais, para engenheiros agrônomos, para engenheiros florestais, que cruzem essas perspectivas. Isso me parece um campo a ser explorado de novas pedagogias, novos conteúdos que precisam ser colocados. E eu trabalho também no Brasil, e estamos com as mesmas problemáticas de sectorizações que não respondem mais à realidade. Eu queria fazer outra colocação que eu vou falar rapidamente em francês. Se Nicolas, tu veux faire une intervention? Silêncio.
I don't know. Do you hear me? Yeah. I could. About what? I didn't understand. I don't understand Portuguese, so I couldn't. Yeah, I can guess what you were saying.
Je te demandais si tu avais des observations en général à faire sur le...
Not especially. Not especially.
Okay.
But if you have questions about honey and honeybees, I can answer.
Yes, please, go ahead.
But I mean, Laure was quite clear, but if people have questions, or I can give some precisions, some details. Okay, so we can take other questions.
Yeah, I have a question. I think it is a question for all of us in a way or another. How each of you feel about people perspectives about their knowledge? Do they value the knowledge they have about everything we have talking about in this panel, for instance, or not? Or do they have a kind of a bad awareness about their condition in the world? Because, for example, I feel people in Beloy very proud of themselves. They think about themselves as being better than other people in Timor. And I see this as very interesting because till today, Atauro is seen by people from the mainland as a very backward place. But for people, Atauro people themselves, they think about themselves as much more developed, much better than people from the mainland island. So how, do you have any thought about that? Just a moment, before you answer, there is a question for Nicolas here.
Yeah.
Please, Nicolas, go ahead.
Okay, I think you can find only one, as far as I know, only one. It's, I mean, in terms of apis, honeybees, this is Apis dorsata, the giant Asian honeybee. But I guess you have a lot more species of wild bees, but the one producing honey, it's mainly Apis dorsata in Atauro. And this is a very, I think this is the most remote place in Southeast Asia where you can, when you can find Apis dorsata population, because it stops in Timor. It goes from Pakistan, west, on the Timor East. That's the limit of that's the range, the limit of the range, geographical range of distribution of the species for Apis dorsata. Is it the same process? Sorry, I'm reading this question. So you don't raise them, you just attract them on a wood. But I think this is the same process in Atauro. But this kind of technique, you can find it also in other places in Indonesia, where I am studying it actually, from Sumatra to Timor-Leste. What did it change for Atauro people that they could sell it in Dili? People used to, actually in many parts of Southeast Asia, for Apis dorsata, people used to use that technique, which is called the rafter technique, for wax, bee wax, or not for honey. Honey is quite new since maybe the 50s, 60s. I don't know in Atauro, but since there is a market in Dili, and since Dili is not too far, and since you can take boats to go there, I mean the price is higher if you sell it in Dili. So that's why people are selling it there. On another question, can they keep the bees for several years? You don't keep the bees actually. you attract the bees during the flower seasons. So each year, the bees will come back or not on the same sites, maybe not on the same structures, maybe not on the same woods, but each year the migratory swarms will travel to Atauro or to other places looking for blossoms, looking for flowers. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nicolas. So going back to the question I shared with you, I think Laura has something to say.
Sim, eu vou tentar responder em português, se for o caso você traduz. Eu acho que a pergunta é extremamente pertinente e forte. Eu não sei isso por motivos linguísticos e também tem uma tal implicações com relação de poderes entre quem expressa seu saber, quem não expressa, as relações entre clãs, as relações entre homens e mulheres, entre jovens e velhos, que eu acho que é uma pergunta que é um tema de pesquisa em si.
Ok.
Que é muito intricado.
So I will just translate Laura's answer. She said that the extent to which people are proud or not of their local knowledge, depending on who they are. So in terms of political position. So the political disputes among houses, clans, or even another hierarchies like between young or elder siblings, all of this play a role in how people are more or less proud of their local knowledge. Yes, so this is and just reacting to Laura's comments. Yeah, I think this is a very delicate issue to deal with during our research because on the contrary of the common sense about local knowledge, which tends to see local knowledge as I think that is shared in a democratic basis in the village. This is not true. This is very well controlled, and it's very difficult to combine for example, state build project about local knowledge, which aims to share it with a wider community, with local about local perspectives on local knowledge, which is done in a base of control of the local knowledge. So this is there is no easy answer to deal with all of this, but yes, I think we have to share to which extent state management of local knowledge entails a kind of violence against people cosmology about how their knowledge has to be managed. Great.
So can I add something?
Please.
Just a short mention to tell that the local knowledge also is regarding, for example, the foundation tales of the clans in Makili. This knowledge is divided especially between the clans because each clan has different foundation tales, and these tales cannot be narrated by the other clans. So it's the elder of the clan, the Lelait, who has the knowledge of this foundation tale. And also it is divided between generations, and many informants told me that the young generation is not very interested into the cosmology of the elders and also the foundation tales. So there is like a rupture and maybe a probable disappearance of some tales or some fragments of the tales. And in this regard, it was quite difficult to have a global site of the tales because the informants had very fragmented ideas about these tales. So in the fieldwork, you have to combine, to compare the different narrations, and to multiply the interviews also.
Great, thank you.
I would just add also that actually with local knowledge, what happens is that there are power relationships too that play a lot. For instance, when there are external people who comes to Atauro Island, maybe people feels that they don't have the knowledge, or when there's university people or people that has done a lot of studies, and so the people over there might feel that their knowledge is not sufficient because they are not because they have not done studies like we expect them to do in like scientific way to prove and validate their hypothesis. So this is a very conflicting issue, but I mean in ethnography, what we do often is to let the people just express their knowledge and not try to be the one that knows everything. So I just say this because I know that as you say, Kelly, maybe local people might feel very, very proud of their knowledge compared to people in the mainland of Timor, but relationships with more political power or scientific power might be different.
I would like to add as well, besides political power and scientific power, I guess we need to think about the economic power as well. So in my field, I've noticed that Marcos has really acknowledged, and he really is aware that his status and his production is everywhere, in not only in Australia, in the Charles Darwin, not just him, but his and his family status, and also in other places in Dili. So he was always putting his knowledge and his status as with really proud of his production. And I think this has to do with the impact of the international market on that production, yeah. So he built his house, he built his brother's house with the money from one of the expositions that they've made in Australia in the beginning of the century. Not the beginning, I guess it's 2012, I'm not sure actually. So this brought them with quite of a inequality in the context of Makili. So in Maulaco, in his village, Maulaco, his house is the only one that is painted. So besides the suku, the build of the suku and the build of the house, the other house they didn't have painting. So this put him and his family in quite of a different situation. And then I would say inequality, but we know that this is kind of different there. And also, I would add that it's different for the woman, of course. So I saw Tomasi really aware of her work and her importance in the house, but also knowing that other women were working outside, working in bonecas de Atauro, working with father. Gente, I was talking all this time without, okay. Okay, so yeah, but.
No, just the last second we lost. We were hearing you before.
No, I was just saying that this point's an interesting, it's different for the man and the woman in that situation, because Tomasa felt really behind of the other women in Makili that were able to go outside and to have work outside at home. So it's really difficult for me as an ethnography, as an anthropology, to say, oh, but the domestic space is also important. We need to focus that when it's not where it has the income from money. And we know that today, most of the reproduction of life in East Timor is made with money as well. So it's kind of a challenge to put this kind of knowledge in other level for them, you know. So yeah, ethical issues.
I would just sort of add on that point that, like, yeah, because I guess Timor-Leste is not, you know, the economic markets are not open as, you know, elsewhere in the world. But I was in Indonesia, somewhere fairly like remote in Indonesia, and it, you know, very, you know, like small village, sparsely populated, and they had fish pens. And I asked, you know, a local, it's like, well, what are they, you know, keeping the fish for? And they said it's for the live seafood trade in Hong Kong. And I was absolutely shocked that, you know, there's this little middle of nowhere Indonesia, they keep the fish alive to ship it to Hong Kong. And then, so then coming to Timor, like I realized that doesn't exist in Timor, which for the reefs is very good at this point, you know, because we, you know, shipping the fish elsewhere is not what you want when you want to, you know, feed your own country. But then it's like this economic incentive as well. Like they can get so much, the money that they will get for this fish that's kept alive and shipped elsewhere is, you know, incentive for them, you know, these communities to do it. So I think that's just, you know, at this point in Timor, that's not the case, but I guess it's probably just a matter of time. You know, it could be 10 years, could be 50 years, but, you know, those supply chains, so to speak, will develop, I guess, which is interesting to think about from, you know, a conservation point of view, I suppose.
Yeah, Kim, just to add something on that. In Bali, most of the shells that are sold for tourists, they're not from Bali or from Indonesia, but they come from Philippines. So this is big trades and international trades and a little bit hidden trades because they sell them like a souvenir from Bali, but that actually comes far away.
And Kelly, I would like to add something.
Please, go ahead.
Just a small to answer you about local knowledge. What I understood through music is that local knowledge in Atauro has to be shared. What I mean by shared is that, for example, Makadade people, they don't want to sing everything without Mandroni and Makili. So they asked me the next time we come to gather Mandroni and Makili, and I haven't understood yet what is exactly Mandroni. You know, it's Ili Timur, I'm not sure about that. But what is important to note is that local knowledge is localized and has to be shared. So we still have to search for that. So why maybe, you know, music and knowledge on music, there must be some people who are the roots, you know, that, that maybe Makili has the root for something and Makadade other roots, other important things, and they want to sit together before telling the myth. I mean, the myth, the story of the origin of songs, for example, which is very important and which is linked to the origin of the word, of the link between the sky and the earth. So it is very important to tell that music is linked to the story of origin, and each group in Atauro must have, we don't know if they have a common story of origin, and we should search for that. So it's still a preliminary works that for me I'm doing. I just know nothing about Atauro, but I'm sure it's we need to go on. Voilà.
Yes, thank you, Dana. So unfortunately, I think our time is over. So I'd like to finish, to end our section. Thank you, and thank all of you for your participation, for your interest in being with us. I'd like to say thank you very much for all the Timorese friends who have supported us in our research endeavors in Atauro or in Dili, everywhere. And thank you for the colloquium organization and for the Centro Cultural Português and the representative of French cooperation in Timor, Estelle, for sharing the information about our panel and for being present on our panel. So we are now to move to the book launch for those who want to be there. And I hope you will have the chance to continue our discussion in other opportunities. So thank you very much. Okay.